Well, folks, here we are. Who's ready for the longest archetype analysis? We are taking a look at the Performapal, Magician, Odd Eyes, and Supreme King archetype, which all fall under that one bundle which is used by the final U-Boy we're taking a look at, which is the main protagonist of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, Yuya Sakaki, and of course, Zark, the thing that which all U-Boys combined into. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we have to take a look at 169 cards in this episode, and that's not even the biggest archetype that I could review on this show. I just gathered materials just for the fun of it for the hero archetype, and that one clocks into a grand total of 247 cards. I just checked. Good lord, that's so many cards. I'm not just an update. I won't be doing heroes immediately tomorrow after this thing. I really need to. I will really need to take a break from this show after I do this, because I unfortunately have exams coming up in college, and I hate it. I hate every second of it. So yeah, it's a question if I'll ever do heroes in the near future, or if I'll ever do them on the channel, because 247 cards, I'm probably going to have to. Well, I already thought about formatting the video a bit differently if I get to do them that way. But if I do end up doing heroes, it's going to be the last archetype ever and the last GX era archetype on the show until either Yu-Gi-Oh! 7 comes along, or another anime exclusive archetype from any of the past Yu-Gi-Ohs gets adapted and turned into a real archetype. Then I could review them. But anyway, I've already wasted 2 minutes talking about the intro. You've been staring at Zark for a bit too long now. Yeah, even though he's a fantastic villain. Anyway, we'll start off with our first monster from the Magician batch, that being Tuning Magician. This is a level 1 spellcaster type monster who is a tuner, and if you have 2 Magician cards in your Pendulum zones, while this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can special summon it but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use this effect once per turn, and if this card is normal or special summoned, your opponent gains 400 life points, then you take 400 damage. It's basically a level 1 tuner, which you tend to run because, well, it's a level 1 tuner and its effect is tolerable. The special summoning condition is okay, and his normal or special summon effect is basically very laughable. You just basically give your opponent 400 life points because of reasons. I mean, you can trigger the Zephyros the Elites effect with this thing, but the results of this experiment, yes, I have experimented with that just for the heck of it, one day on Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro. They're basically too irrelevant to even mention or showcase, because, well, it opens rank 4 plays or a level 5 synchro plays or link plays, which are, again, a bit too specific. And not to mention that the 400 life point gain for the opponent is absolutely hilarious if you happen to be playing against an Arrow Mage player. So yeah, again, people used to run this a lot. They still do on occasion, but they don't mostly run it because this thing actually received a retrain, which we won't be talking about for a while until we get to the Pendulum monsters. Yeah, because the retrain is actually a Pendulum monster. So yeah. Next up, we jump into the Performapals with Performapal Kuribol. It was supposed to be like Kuri Adorable or something like that, but they made it into a pun which is barely pronounceable, the way how Kuribo is spelled. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, change the attack target to this card, then proceed to the damage calculation, and if you would take battle damage from that battle, you gain that much life points instead. Again, it's a okay hand trap, but it's entirely outclassed by stuff like Scarecrow or Battle Fader or any other hand trap which basically intercepts attacks, so yeah. It isn't even a tuner, so go figure. Next up we have Performapal Life Swordsman, another level 1, and if when your opponent gains life points, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, this card's attack becomes equal to the life points your opponent gain. You can tribute this card, and then target one face-up monster you control. It gains 1000 attack until the end of this turn. Are you supposed to like combo this with Tuning Magician in order to get Formula Synchron out? Or get a Link 2 monster? Well, on this effect isn't really relevant unless you're playing against, again, Aromage players. And yeah, if it was on the if it was along the lines of your opponent taking damage or you gaining life points, then I guess it would be a bit more splashable, even though not much. But still, it's not the most optimal thing to consider. Next up we have Performapal Rain Goat. When a card or effect is activated that will inflict damage to you, quick effect, you can discard this card, make that effect damage to you 0. During the main phase, quick effect, you can discard this card and target one Performapal or Odd Eyes card you control. This turn it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effect. Well, the first effect is sure to give you an edge against those Trickstar players, but the second effect is actually tolerable effect protection, as we'll see later on that the Archetype is completely lacking in any form of protection. So yeah, you're mostly relying on this thing if you even consider running it for the protection. Next up we have Performapal Swordfish, their first level 2. If this card is normal or special summoned, all monsters your opponent currently control lose 600 attack and defense, and if you special summon monster while you control this card, all monsters your opponent currently control lose 600 attack and defense. Oh no, my 600 attack and defense as well. What else am I going to do? Well, nothing really, because stat laws, which is this minuscule, doesn't even matter in the long run. Next up we have Performapal Spike Eagle. Once per turn you can target one face-up monster you control. If it attacks a defense position monster, it inflicts piercing damage. It's a level 2 which gives one monster a once per turn piercing damage effect, which is peak 2005 in my opinion. So yeah, even though this thing didn't come out in 2005, which makes it even more outdated, so yeah. Next up we have our first level 3 Performapal Thunder Rhino. Monsters your opponent controls cannot target the face-up of Performapal monsters for attacks, except this one. If a Performapal cards you control except Performapal Thunder Rhino will be destroyed by battle or card effect while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card instead. Again, you're most likely going to be focusing on the Odd Eyes section more, and the Performapals you usually tend to run are usually some of them which can easily special summon themselves or special summon other monsters, or that they basically search out the Odd Eyes lineup and the Magician lineup. So yeah, this one specifically works on Performapals, so it's not overall worth it. Next up we have Performapal Review Dancer. If your opponent controls a monster and you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. This card can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of a Performapal monster. You're most likely not going to be tribute summoning at all, let alone Performapals, so yeah, you basically use this for the special summoning effect alone. Next up we have Performapal Sky Pupil. During either player's turn, you can return one level 5 or higher Performapal monster you control to the hand, special summon this card from your hand. You can only use this effect once per turn, and if this card battles an opponent's monster, that monster has its effects negated until the end of the damage step. Before damage calculation, if this card attacks an opponent's monster while you control another Performapal monster, you can destroy that opponent's monster. It's alright, I guess, but the main problem is that it has to return level 5 or higher Performapal monster for its special summoning condition, which Performapals don't have any good ones, and the ones that they do have are barely worth considered running, so yeah, neither is this then. Next up we have Performapal Hip Hippo. After you normal summon this card, you can tribute summon one level 7 or higher monster in face-up attack position during your main phase this turn, in addition to your normal summoner set. You gain this effect once per turn. Now, if this card made absolutely any sense, it would give you a normal summon regardless of what the hell you're summoning, but it specifically restricts you to tribute summoning a level 7 monster, which, again, rank 7 plays, I get it, but no, it's not very archetype. Like, sure, you can summon odd eyes monsters, which you most likely are summoning with this thing, but there are much better ways and much more consistent ways to straight up special summon those monsters other than relying on this chunky little boy. Next up we have Performapal Flip Hippo. When this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one Performapal monster from your hand, but it has its effects negated until the end of this turn. Once per turn you can change all monsters you control to defense position. A outdated type of effect which, again, defense positions don't matter in the long run at all in the Link focused meta, so don't even bother with this one. Next up we have Performapal Friend Donkey. When this card is normal summoned, you can special summon one level 4 or lower Performapal monster from your hand or graveyard. It's alright, but I would have loved it if it didn't special summon strictly Performapals, as in like Flip Hippo does. Sure, you can run both of these as a basically rank 3 enablers, but both of them basically eat up your normal summon, so they're barely worth considering. Next up we have Performapal Corn. Once per turn during your main phase, if this card was normal or special summoned this turn, you can target one other Performapal monster you control with 1000 or less attack, change both this card and that card you control from a face-up attack position to defense position. If you do, add one Odd Eyes monster from your deck to your hand. During your opponent's turn, you can banish one Performapal monster except Performapal Corn and discard from your graveyard, gain 500 life points, and this is also a quick effect. The life point gain is completely irrelevant, and here we have our first Performapal monster which searches out the Odd Eyes lineup, which is kind of important because Odd Eyes lineup are the most played and versatile in terms of, well, performances, as we'll see later on. And if this card's name seems a bit on the weirder side, that's because there's also a Performapal Uni, which is our first level 4. And once per turn during your main phase, if this card was normal or special summoned this turn, you can special summon one level 3 or lower Performapal monster from your hand in attack position. During your opponent's turn, you can banish one Performapal monster except Performapal Uni and discard from your graveyard. The next time you would take battle damage this turn, you do not. And this is a quick effect. Now, as the name implies, these two names do intend to spell out the word unicorn, and they also imply that they're supposed to be used in tandem, as their effects basically complement each other. The effects could be a lot better. I was actually very disappointed after seeing these two for the first time. Basically, they're the duo. They're the Performapal duo from the Arc 5 manga, and it's actually a shame because I really like the design of these two, and I would have loved it if they were basically the equivalent of the six samurais Mizuho and Shinai. So yeah, yeah, I would have loved them a lot better if they actually had their very nice special summoning conditions like they did, and if their effects actually complemented the archetype as well. If you run any of these, you basically run. If you run one of these, what I wanted to say, you basically run the other as well. And Corn is more useful because she searches out Odd Eyes monsters, which are essential to the deck's functioning. So yeah. Performapal Turn Trooper is another level 4, and at the start of your battle phase, you can place one counter on this card, max 2. This card gains effects based on the number of counters on it. 1 counter. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can negate it, and 2 counters. You can tribute this card to banish all monsters on the field on your opponent's until your opponent's second end phase after activation. Oh boy, what do we have here? It's a frail little level 4 which has such a strong removal effect, which basically makes him a makes him a prime effect removing target in the history. So yeah, and the second effect basically never goes up because this thing doesn't even make it into the first battle phase. So yeah. Next up we have Performapal Whip Snake. Once per turn during either player's main phase, you can target one face-up monster on the field, switch its current attack and defense until the end of this turn. A pointless gimmick effect which is completely irrelevant in the Link era. Let's move on. Next up we have Performapal Salut Tiger. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can add one Performapal Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect once per turn. And this a monster which specifically searches out pendulum monsters, which are alright, admittedly the best thing about the Performapal lineup is admirable, but again, this might have seen play in pure Performapal decks back when Pepe was still alive and kicking in terms of viability, but other than that, it's been genuinely has become long outdated. Next up we have Performapal Second Donkey. When this card is normal or special summon, you can send one Performapal monster from your deck to the graveyard except himself, and if you have 2 cards in your Pendulum zones, you can add it to your hand instead. You essentially run 3 of these because it's an effect that is not limited to a once per turn usage, and not to mention it's either a Foolish Burial if you don't have a Pendulum zone, and it's a search effect if you do have it, so yeah. And it also has good stats for a level 4, which is also pretty nice. Next up we have Performapal Stamp Turtle. Once per turn you can target up to 2 face-up monsters on the field and increase their levels by 1. Oh no, those fortune ladies are sure to get a lot of mileage out of this old turtle guy. Anyway, don't run this. Next up we have Performapal Longphone Bull. If this card is special summoned, you can add 1 Performapal monster from your deck to your hand except a Pendulum monster, but you can only use this effect once per turn. Yeah, this is your prime target for like pendulum summoning and all that, but the biggest complaint I have here is that he doesn't search pendulum monsters, which is a big bummer in my opinion, so yeah. Next up we have Performapal Skeeter Skimmer. When this face-up attack position card is targeted for an attack, you can change this card to face-up defense position, and if you do, negate the attack. It's literally a straight upgrade over Gambara Knight, which just switches to defense mode without doing anything. So yeah, in Performapal stall builds, you can usually run 3 of these in order to basically secure yourself from a couple of attacks. But nowadays it's basically a question if something like this could even make it into the battle phase. So yeah. Next up we have Performapal Hand Samuraiger. I hope I didn't butcher that name because this guy looks cool as heck. When this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can add 1 level 5 or higher Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Performapal Hand Samuraiger once per turn. Just run 3 of these at all times. He searches out any level 5 or higher Pendulum monster, which is beyond amazing for this archetype's consistency, but it also searches out archetypal stuff such as Odd Eyes, basically Magician, Supreme King Gates, which I'll get into later, and basically he's a very nice card, and good, do max out on this guy. As well as Performapal Hell Princess. When you normal or special summon a Performapal monster, except Performapal Hell Princess, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. Free materials are always welcome, and yeah, that's basically why you run 3 of these at all times. Next up we have Performapal Bot-Eyed Lizard. Once per turn during your main phase, if this card was normal or special summoned this turn, you can send 1 Odd Eyes monster from your deck to the graveyard, and this card's name becomes the sent monster's original name until the end phase. The only usage this thing has is to set up graveyard in the graveyard for reviving your Odd Eyes monsters, and maybe to use them as fusion or Xyz materials, or well, synchro materials, whatever. It's a name copy effect. Which you kinda wish that this has better targets for it. Although there is actually a fusion monster which can actually benefit from using this thing as material. So yeah. Next up we have Performapal Bowhopper. You contribute 1 Performapal monster, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the level of it had on the field times 100. Original if face down. You contribute 1 Performapal monster and target 1 Performapal in your graveyard other than the tributed monster, add it to your hand. You can only use each effect of Performapal Bowhopper once per turn. What the hell were they thinking with this one? First of all, we have the effect which tributes a monster in order to deal a minuscule amount of burn damage, and then we have a freaking worse version of shock troops of the ice barrier. What the hell is this? Just get it out of my sight. Anyway, next up we have Performapal Teeter Totter Hopper. The first time this special summoned card would be destroyed by battle each turn, it is not destroyed. Once per turn during your opponent's end phase, you can target one level 3 or lower Performapal monster in your graveyard, send this card to the graveyard, and if you do, add that monster to your hand. If a Performapal monster is sent from the hand to your graveyard, except during the damage step, while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Teeter Totter Hopper once per turn. Oh boy, what a bloated effect we have here. Fun fact, this thing was actually used in an infinite loop in an anime where basically Yuya used it alongside with Raingoat in order to FTK the Guardian guy. I forgot his name already. Well, they were in the facility. Yeah, unless you're feeling like replicating that loop, I wouldn't advise running this. Next up we have our other magician, that being Doomstar Magician, and it's our final level 4 of the non-pendulum monsters. And once per turn you can discard one card and target one card in either player's pendulum zone and destroy that card. And if you do, draw one card. Yeah, you're most likely going to be using this on your own monsters since, again, the pendulum monsters are very rarely played in the Link era now. And not to mention that the Archetype already has a card with the Pendulum department, which is miles better than this thing's, and it doesn't even offer require a discard. So yeah, Doomstar Magician is not a good card. Next up we have our first tribute monster, that being Performapal Spring Goose, which is our first and only non-pendulum level 5. You can banish this card from your graveyard and target 2 cards among the pendulum monsters you control and or the magician and Performapal cards in your pendulum zone, return them to the hand. You can only use this effect of Performapal Spring Goose once per turn. This is not a Performapal. This is a Mist Valley card. Yeah, the only relevant usage of this thing that I can think of is just bouncing back your monsters in order to trigger a Divine Wind card, and not to mention that the Performapals don't barely have any level 4 wind monsters, so yeah, if any, I need to check still, but yeah, don't run it unless unless your life depended on it, which is rarely. Next up we have Performapal Misdirector. It's our first level 6 with 0 attack and 2000 defense. It happens to be a tuner monster. While you control an Odd Eyes monster, your opponent cannot target this card for attacks. While this card is in defense position, your Odd Eyes monsters cannot be destroyed by battle. Also, you take no battle damage from those battles. You can target one level 1 monster in your graveyard, special summon it but negate its effects if any, and if you do, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon one synchro monster using only that monster and this card, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Misdirector once per turn. As we've seen early on, the level 1 lineup of the Performapals are barely worth running. Well, we'll get to the Pendulum monsters soon, but the only relevant target this thing can bring out is Raingoat, provided that you run this or run the Raingoat in the first place. Next up we have Performapal Elf Hammer. If you control 2 or more Performapal cards, you can normal summon this card without tributing. Cannot attack unless you control another Performapal card. When this card declares an attack, you can return all spell or trap cards your opponent controls to the hand. It's alright in a basically a meta where back row is heavily dominant, which certainly isn't the Link-focused meta. Your opponent usually has 1 or 2 heavy floodgates, which you tend to remove by other means if you happen to run any more consistent back row removal and, well, spot removal, since some better monsters can also clear out back row. And if this card again made any sense, it would say that if you control 2 or more Performapal cards, you could special summon this thing, not normal summon it without tributing, which is how high level monsters should function nowadays. Next up we have Performapal Inflator Tapir. During damage calculation in either player's turn, if a monster you control battles an opponent's monster, you can discard this card. Neither player takes any battle damage for that battle, and when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack while this card is in your graveyard, you can discard one Performapal monster, special summon this card in defense position, and you can only use this effect once per turn. I would have loved it a bit more if it was like Kiteroid, which is the anime only Roid monster, which had the effect that you can discard him to negate an attack and then banish him from the graveyard in order to negate the other attack, which would have made this card a pretty good, cool card to consider having. But it's basically a way worse Rainbow Kuribo, so no. Next up we have Performapal Claybreaker, the final level 6. If this tribute summon card battles an opponent's monster during damage calculation, you can make that opponent's monster lose 500 attack for each face-up Pendulum monster currently in your extra deck until the end of this turn. When you Pendulum summon 2 or more monsters at the same time while this card is in your graveyard, you can add this card from your graveyard to your hand. You can only use each effect of a Claybreaker once per turn. Again, your Pendulum monsters tend to not... you don't tend to have many Pendulum monsters in your extra deck, so on a good day, the attack reduction that will be going on here is around 1000 at best, and that's about it. And you barely will be ever Pendulum summoning since links are a thing. So yeah, if you really want to run this, then it's probably okay at 1. Next up we have Performapal Sky Magician. Once per turn, if you activate a spell card, this card gains 300 attack. During either player's turn, you can target one continuous spell card you control, return it to the hand, then you can activate one Magician continuous spell card from your hand, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Sky Magician once per turn, and if this face-up card leaves the field, you can target one card on the field, destroy it. It's alright, and it's basically its effects are basically built around the 2 continuous spell cards, the Magician's right and left hand, which we'll get into in a second, which are pretty devastating floodgates when we get to them. And it also happens to have a nice floating effect when it leaves the field, that you can target on a card on the field and destroy it, which is pretty good since you can actually always use this thing as a link material or an Xyz material or basically any material for an extra deck summon, and then you get to swap a card on the field, which is always lovely. So yeah, good card. Next up we have Performapal Slate Hand Magician. You can special summon this card from your hand by tributing a Performapal monster except a Pendulum monster. Once per turn you can discard one card and target one face-up card on the field, destroy it. It's alright, it's level 7 that can special summon itself. It's basically a retrain of Sky Magician in a way. Yeah, the Performapals usually do have a bit of trouble by finding suitable discards, so yeah, just be careful you don't discard your playmakers and you'll be good to go. Run 1 or 2 of these. Next up we have Odd Eyes Dragon. Yeah, now we will move on to the Odd Eyes lineup for a bit. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half the original attack of that monster in the graveyard. Yeah, this is the first form of the final dimension dragon, that is the Odd Eyes Dragon before he was upgraded into his Pendulum state, which is a lot better. So yeah, there isn't any consistent ways of bringing him out, so yeah. Next up we have the final level 7, no, the semi-final level 7, sorry, Odd Eyes Wizard Dragon. If this card is in your hand, you can tribute one dark monster, send one Odd Eyes Dragon from your hand, deck, or face-up field to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon this card. If this card is in your possession, is destroyed by an opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon one Odd Eyes monster from your deck or graveyard except Odd Eyes Wizard Dragon. Then you can add one Spiral Flame Strike from your deck to your hand. Spiral Flame Strike is a spell card which we'll mention later, and as for this thing, it requires you to run the worst Odd Eyes monster, and yeah, it's really not good. It's basically a monster which requires a very specific monster, which is searchable, mind you, but there are no better ways to access it quick enough to get this thing onto the field as turbo as possible. So yeah, run by preference in my opinion, both of them. Now we go on to the final level 7, that being Odd Eyes Saber Dragon. If this card is in your hand, you contribute one light monster, send one odd-eyes dragon from your hand, deck, or side of the field to the graveyard, and if you do, special summon this card, and when this card destroys an opponent's monster and sends it to the graveyard, you can destroy one monster your opponent controls. It falls in the same deal as Wizard Dragon, only even worse due to not giving you a search when it dies. So, yeah, again, also Performapals hardly have any light monsters on the field, but it's a good thing that you contribute any light monster, so it offers some splash abilities if you choose to run this. So, yeah, run by preference as well. Moving on to the level 8s, we have Odd-Eyes Lancer Dragon, and oh my god, look at this artwork. He's like, what do you mean? I am proud of it. If a Pendulum monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you contribute one monster to special summon this card from your hand. If this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate any spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. If an Odd-Eyes monster card you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can destroy one Odd-Eyes card in your hand, Monster Zone or Pendulum Zone instead. It's a pretty okay card. It offers a pretty unique type of protection effect, since it straight up destroys an Odd-Eyes card in your hand, which is like very reminiscent of Fire King Avatar Yaksha. And yeah, it's also a trade-in target. It's a light monster, so you can use Honest if you feel like it. So yeah. And lastly, we have the last non-pendulum monster, which is Odd-Eyes Advanced Dragon. You can tribute summon this card by tributing a level 5 or higher monster. If this card is tribute summon, you can destroy one monster your opponent controls, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack. When this card destroys a monster by battle, you can special summon one level 5 or higher monster from your hand or graveyard in defense position, except Odd-Eyes Advanced Dragon, and you can only use this effect of Odd-Eyes Advanced Dragon once per turn. I find the summoning condition of this guy pretty funny, since it's the exact same summoning condition as the Mega Monarchs have. But in terms of everything else, it's also a very nice card to consider having. It's basically a different flavor of Lancer Dragon, who had the Armades shut down when attacking and was protecting his own comrades, while this one tends to be a bit more aggressive and offers play extension instead of basically protection effects. You basically, when you use the if you use the Lancer Dragon's protection effect, then this thing can basically bring you back your the cost you paid in order to protect Lancer Dragons. So yeah, basically they're two sides of the same coin in that regard. Alright, now moving on to the Pendulum monsters. First up we have three normal Pendulum monsters, first of which is Dragon Pulse Magician, and they only have the Pendulum effect, scale 1, that once per turn, if you have a Magician card in your other Pendulum Zone, you can discard a Pendulum monster to target a face-up monster on the field and destroy it. And Dragon Pit Magician has the exact same effect, only for spell cards, and it's a scale 8, and this one's a level 7. And then we have Odd-Eyes Arc Pendulum Dragon, which is also a level 7 scale 8, and its pendulum effect, that is, if an Odd-Eyes card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can summon one Odd-Eyes monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard, and you can only use this effect of Odd-Eyes Arc Pendulum Dragon once per turn. In Odd-Eyes dedicated build, you definitely run 3 of these, since he can easily be searched out with something like Summoner's Art and basically other Odd-Eyes centric support cards, and the pendulum effect it offers to your Odd-Eyes is absolutely arctastical, so yeah, you definitely run 3 of these. Alright, now moving on to the effect monsters, first of which we have Performapal Odd-Eyes Unicorn, a level 1 with 100 attack, scale 8. Its pendulum effect at once while this card is in your Pendulum Zone, when your Odd-Eyes monster declares an attack, you can target one other Performapal monster you control. That attacking monster gains attack equal to the original attack of the targeted monster on the field until the end of the battle phase, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that when it's normal or special summon, you can target a Performapal monster in your graveyard, then gain life points equal to its attack. Yeah, you're going to be using the pendulum effect all the freaking time, because the monster effect is downright pointless. So moving on, we have Performapal Chain Giraffe. Alright, that's a cute pun in my opinion. And it's a scale 5, also a level 1, and its Pendulum effect, and when exactly one monster you control and no other cards is destroyed by battle, you can destroy this card, and if you do, special summon that monster destroyed by battle in attack position, and if you do that, it can be destroyed by battle this turn, even if this card leaves the field. But its monster effect is when this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, and while this card is face-up on the field, that face-up monster cannot attack, also negate its effects while it's on the field. It's alright. It's an alright effect if it wasn't for the fact that this is a frail level 1 which can be disposed of in basically any anticlimactic way, which is how modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Now functions when big boss monsters stare down on these weak chocolates like this one. Pendulum effect is also fine, but nothing too spectacular, mostly due to the fact that she's a scale 5, which is definitely not the scale you want your Performapals to be. Next up we have Performapal Seal Eel. Once per turn, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls. That face-up monster has its effects negated until the end of this next turn, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is if it is normal or special summon, you can target one set spell or trap your opponent controls. That set card cannot be activated this turn, and neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this effect's activation. Again, the monster effect is completely irrelevant since the opponent's back row tends to be face-up and activated most of the time. And the Pendulum effect is something I would consider good because, well, you can negate problem monsters' effects, but the fact remains in the problem remains in the fact that the most stuff we would want to negate can't be targeted or affected. So yeah, you're left resorting to kaiju baiting. So yeah. Next up we have Performapal Guitardle. And the first off, it's a scale 6, and if a Performapal card is activated in your other Pendulum zone, you can draw one card, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And its monster effect is, once per turn you can target one card in your Pendulum zone, increase its Pendulum scale by 2 until the end of this turn. Yeah, you tend to basically play this first and then activate something else in order to get a draw, and then get rid of this by something like a certain other monster, which we'll get into in a second, or basically any kind of removal so to free up your Pendulum scale, so you can either activate this thing again or, well, play another thing. So yeah. Next up we have Performapal Gongato. It's at scale 2 this time, and once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can activate this effect. You take no battle damage from that battle, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that once per turn, when an attack is declared involving a monster you control and an opponent's monster, you can activate this effect. You take no battle damage from that battle. Yeah, negating battle damage is fine. I would only wish that you did anything else. Sure, you can use it in a pinch, but you're most likely going to be using this for, well, the fact that it's a scale 2 and you can basically Pendulum summon pretty much anything. So yeah, sure, it's a level 1 which you can easily summon with 1/1. So yeah, it's fine, I guess. Next up we have, oh boy, we have Performapal 5 Rainbow Magician. This is a level 1 which is a scale 12, 100 attack and defense. And its Pendulum effect is that you cannot Pendulum summon except from the extra deck. This effect cannot be negated. Each player applies one of these effects based on the number of set cards in their spell and trap zones. 0. All monsters they control cannot attack or activate their effects. 4 or more, the attack of all monsters they control become double its original attack. And its monster effect is that if either player sets a spell or trap card on your field while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can place it in the Pendulum zone. Yeah, this is one of the last Pendulum monsters Yui ever played in the anime in his final duel against Reiji. And it actually won him the game through anime plot armor and gimmicks. Because, holy shit, do you actually need to build your deck around this thing in order to even function properly. If your opponent sets only one spell or trap cards, this thing is borderline useless, I tell you. yeah, sure, it has a pretty strong disabling effect, but you actually have to like build your deck entirely based around this card, and you you tend to run stuff like Dark Simorg in order to prevent that from happening, and then using your own back row to in order to make plays. Not to mention that you need to don't uh, that you mustn't have a full pendulum scale active if you want to employ this effect, since you need 4 or more cards in order to get the beneficial effect. Don't even bother with this one. Next up we have Performapal Trump Witch. It's a scale 4 and our final level 1. Its pendulum effect is that you once per turn you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters you control as fusion materials. And its monster effect is that you contribute it to add a polymerization from your deck or graveyard to your hand. The monster effect is basically outclassed by any other poly searching engine and fusion searching engine in existence. Well, the first effect is something you would always see on a Pendulum spam archetype, which also focuses on fusion, such as this one, and for all intensive purposes, it's an okay effect. And next up we have Performapal Trump Girl, who is our first level 2 Pendulum monster, which has no pendulum effects. It's a scale 4, and its monster effect is that you can fusion once per turn you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters you control as fusion materials, including this card. And if this card in the Pendulum Zone is destroyed, you can target one Dragon-type fusion monster in your graveyard, special summon it, but destroy it during the end phase. This is basically a fusion enabler without using Poly or any other fusions card. Basically, it enables you a contact fusion, so it basically gives you some breathing room there. But the archetype has a pretty nice fusion card, which you most likely use to fusion summon your monsters. Polymerization is hardly ran, and yeah, it's kind of a gimmicky one-off in my opinion. Next up we have Performapal Handstand Raccoon. It's a scale 3, and its pendulum effect is that you can target one Performapal card you control, return it to the hand, but for the rest of this turn you cannot activate cards or effects of cards with the same name as the one returned to the hand by this effect, even if this card leaves the field, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Handstand Raccoon once per turn. And its monster effect is that when it is destroyed by battle, you can target one card on the field and return it to the hand. This is basically a self-bouncer, which is outclassed by basically any other self-bouncer in the game, and not to mention that the monster effect is insanely slow and requires way too much work in order to, well, function properly. In other words, don't run it. Next up we have Performapal Turn Toad. It's a scale 3 as well, and once per turn you can target one face-up monster on the field, switch its current attack and defense until the end of this turn, and its monster effect is that once per turn during your main phase, except during the damage step, you can target one monster you control, change its battle position, and if you do, switch its current attack and defense until the end of this turn. It's a monster, another tragic victim of the Link era, which I won't bother even elaborating on, so let's move on. Next up we have Performapal Trampolinx. This is another level 2 which is also now a scale 4. Its pendulum effect is that when you pendulum summon a monster, you can target one card in either player's pendulum zone, return it to the hand, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And its monster effect is when it's normal summon, you can target one card in either player's pendulum zone, return it to the hand. It doesn't seem like much, but this card actually saw tons of competitive play in Clifford's of all things, since this can basically bounce back Clifford Scout in order to proc its search effect later again if you happen to basically bounce this thing back or basically recycle it by any other means. You can basically get 2 searches by Clifford Scout, which is still limited, which was still limited at the time, but nowadays it's not necessary since Clifford Scout is unlimited, or at least I think. I know he was moved to semi-limited in one of the recent formats, but I'm not sure if he actually got off the list or not. So yeah. All I know is that this thing is no longer needed in Clifford's. As for Performapals, well, they hardly benefit from bouncing back their pendulum monsters, so yeah. Next up we have Performapal Auto Synchron. This is a level 2 tuner monster, scale 6. And its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target one Performapal or Odd-Eyes monster you control. This turn that face up when a monster is treated as a tuner. Also its level becomes 1, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect that if this card special summon from the extra deck is used as a synchro material, banish it. When this card is normal spell summoned, you can target one level 3 or lower Performapal or Odd-Eyes monster in your graveyard and special summon it, but it has its effects negated. And once per turn, you can target one card in your Pendulum zone, special summon it, but it has its effects negated. If any, then immediately after this thing resolves, synchro summon one synchro monster using only that monster and discard as material. It's definitely an archetypal tuner with lots of different varying effects depending on what you might need. When it's normal summoned, yeah, this thing also happens to eat up your normal summon. You basically get to revive a monster which you can then proceed to use as link material or basically any extra deck material. Also you get to summon a Pendulum monster from your Pendulum zone in order to use it as a material, which I would have loved it if you could actually special summon a Pendulum monster from the Pendulum zone without doing the quick fusion after that. Quick synchro, sorry, after that. But as it is now, it's a perfectly fine card. The first effect, the Pendulum effect, is barely ever going to be used, so yeah. Next up we have Performapal Cheermole, our final level 2 in the Pendulum department. Its Pendulum effect is a scale 5. Its Pendulum effect is that all Pendulum monsters you control gain 300 attack, and its monster effect is that you can target one monster whose current attack is different from its original attack and apply the appropriate effect, and you can only use this effect once per turn. If that monster's attack is higher than its original, it gains 1000 attack, and if that monster's current attack is lower than its original, it loses 1000 attack. Yeah, it's a gimmicky attack manipulation card which barely ever sees play, so no, don't run it. Next up we have our first level 3, that being Performapal Whimwitch. It's a scale 4, and its Pendulum effect is that if your opponent controls a face-up monster that was special summoned from the extra deck, and you do not, you can special summon this card from your Pendulum zone, and you can only use its effect once per turn. And its monster effect is that it can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of a Pendulum monster. Again, monster effects entirely pointless since you won't be tribute summoning in this day and age unless you're playing Monarchs, and the first effect is pretty decent special summoning condition, which is pretty alright, so yeah, run any number of these. Next up we have Performapal Trumpanda. It's a scale 3, and when its Pendulum effect is that once per turn you can increase this card's Pendulum scale by 1, maximum 12. And its monster effect is when your Pendulum monster is targeted for an attack, you can negate the attack, and you can only use this effect of Trumpanda once per turn. Again, it's a good effect to have an attack negation on board if you absolutely need it, but weak monsters such as this are usually tend to be used up as link material or basically used up as extra deck material, or if not specifically link monsters. And I have no idea what the purpose of the Pendulum effect is supposed to be, and I don't want to think about it any further. Next up we have Performapal Card Gardener. This is a scale 8, and its Pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target one face-up defense position monster you control. Its defense becomes the combined original defense of all face-up defense position monsters you control, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that this card gains defense equal to the combined original defense of all other Performapal monsters you control. I don't know who made this, and I bet nobody even cares that this didn't even come into the TCG. Because, well, nobody in the right mind is going to use this thing because it's outdated. Moving on. Next up we have Performapal Ballad. It's a scale 2, and its Pendulum effect is that once per turn at the start of the damage step, when your Performapal monster battles an opponent's face-up monster, you can make that opponent's monster lose 600 attack even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is if your Performapal monster attacked after damage calculation, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls. That target loses attack equal to the attack of that Performapal monster. It's basically a very tricky and gimmicky battle interceptor, which can be which can be disposed of in basically any anticlimactic way. So yeah, and not to mention that the pendulum effect is even worse. So no. Next up we have Performapal Barracuda. This is a scale 5 and has the exact same stats as the Ballad. And its pendulum effect is one that once per turn, if your Performapal monster battles an opponent's monster before damage calculation, you can make that opponent's monster lose attack equal to the difference between its original attack and its current attack, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that during either player's turn, you can target a Performapal monster whose attack is different than from its original attack, and it gains attack equal to the difference until the end of this turn. You can only use this effect of Performapal Barracuda once per turn. Again, it's basically a ballad which is focused on your monsters, which is admirable if it wasn't for the fact that it focuses on the wrong branch of monsters. If it focused on odd eyes or magicians, that wouldn't have any complaints, or if it focused on all of them. But it only focuses on Performapals, which are very sparsely ran in competitive builds, if are ever. So yeah, run one if you feel like it. Next up we have Performapal Bit-Bite Turtle. It's a scale 3, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can reveal a Performapal or Odd Eyes monster in your hand, and if you do, reduce the levels of all monsters in your hand with that name by 1 for the rest of this turn, even if they are summoned, set, and even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is when it's destroyed by battle, you can destroy the monster that destroyed it. The monster effect is basically a Yomi ship. It even has the same stats as Yomi ship, so I am not surprised in the slightest. However, the monster effect is basically a way worse cost down. So yeah, if you want to basically use this card, you basically run either Yomi ship or cost down, whatever you need, which is neither in today's meta. Next up we have Performapal Extra Slinger. It's another level 3, and it's a scale 6 as well. And once per turn, monster effect. Its pendulum effect that during your main phase you can inflict 300 damage to your opponent for each face-up pendulum monster in their extra deck. You can only use this effect of Pendulum Extra Slinger, Performapal Extra Slinger once per turn, and you cannot pendulum summon the turn you activate this effect. And its monster effect is that once per turn you can banish one card from your extra deck, then target one card in a pendulum zone, destroy it, and if you do, inflict 300 damage to your opponent. This might be one of the most gimmicky and the worst burn and spot removal cards ever in existence. And in one of the cases, it even goes against the logic of the archetype it belongs to. So no, don't run it. Next up we have Performapal Fire Muffler Lion. Its pendulum effect is, it's a skill 5, its pendulum effect is that if when a pendulum monster you control is destroyed by battle, you can special summon this card from your pendulum zone. And its monster effect is when once per turn, if a pendulum monster you control destroys an opponent's monster by battle after damage calculation, you can make that monster you control gain 200 attack until the end of the battle phase, and if you do, it can make a second attack in a row. This is basically a very powerful effect since it can basically work on any pendulum monster. But the fact that this thing is a very weak level 3, which can be disposed of in basically any way imaginable, makes it barely worth running, and the pendulum effect barely helps in that regard. Next up we have Performapal Pero Trio. It's a scale 2, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn if you control a Performapal Magician or Odd Eyes card in your other pendulum zone except for a Para Trio, you can make this card's pendulum scale become 7 until the end of this turn. And its monster effect that is when it's destroyed by battle, you can special summon a Performapal monster from your deck except a pendulum monster. The monster effect basically turns them into a way worse Mystic Tomato, since it doesn't work on pendulum monsters, which are the best thing about the archetype. And the first effect is basically an effect that benefits pendulum heavy decks, which are barely any in today's meta. So yeah, you basically will mostly run it due to its monster effect, if ever. Next up we have Performapal Lizard Draw. This is another level 3, and it's a scale 6. And if you have a Performapal card in your other Pendulum zone, except Performapal Lizard Draw, you can destroy this card. And if you do, draw one card. You can only use this effect of Lizard Draw once per turn. And its monster effect is that if another face-up monster you control is destroyed by your opponent's attack or a card effect, you can draw cards equal to the number of Performapal monsters you currently control, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Lizard Draw once per turn. This used to be a start of the show and was on the semi-limited list and the limited list for a long time, while Pepe was still a very viable deck and very possible deck to be played, since you can basically use this thing alongside with Guitardle in order to get 2 draws, and you basically it basically sets up the play of the Pepe deck, which I already talked about pretty extensively when I reviewed the Performage archetype, which is the second archetype, the component of the Pepe playstyle. So yeah, if you run this in a dedicated Performapal build, this is an absolute tree-off staple. Next up we have Performapal Momon Carpet. This is a Pendulum Flip Effect monster, scale 7, and its Pendulum effect is that unless you have a card in your other Pendulum zone, destroy this card, and when this card in the Pendulum zone is in the Pendulum zone, any battle damage you take becomes halved. And its effect is a flip effect that you can target one set card on the field and destroy it, and if this card is special summoned, you can change it to face down defense position. Well, it basically is an effect. Its only relevant effect is to halve the battle damage, which is not that impressive, and not to mention that you have to specifically control another Pendulum monster in your other Pendulum zone in order to apply said effect. Otherwise, this card gets destroyed. Don't bother with this one. Next up, we have Time Gazer Magician. Yeah, we're going on to the magicians for a bit. And this one's a scale 8, and you must control no monsters to activate this card. If a Pendulum monster you control battles, your opponent cannot activate trap cards until the end of the damage step. Unless you have a Magician card or Odd Eyes card in your other Pendulum zone, this card's Pendulum scale becomes 4. And its monster effect is that each turn the first card in your Pendulum zone that will be destroyed by an opponent's card effect is not destroyed. Most of the time people who actually play these cards don't even know their monster effects actually exist, since Pendulum magicians tend to be mostly in the Pendulum zones and giving different kinds of buffs or debuffs to the opponent's monsters. This one protects you from trap cards during the battle phase. It also protects you from hand traps such as Impermanence or Evenly Matched. So yeah, however, the opponent is barely ever going to be playing Evenly Matched during the battle phase, so I guess. But yeah, if you're wondering why it doesn't cover spell cards, well, that's the other Pendulum Scales job, which we'll get into in a minute since it's a level 5 monster. But yeah, this card actually got an apprentice, maybe, known as Time Breaker Magician. This is a scale 2, and its Pendulum effect that each turn the first Pendulum monster you control that will be destroyed by an opponent's card effect, it is not destroyed. Basically the monster effect of Time Gazer Magician. And its monster effect is that when this card is Pendulum summoned from the hand and no other cards are Pendulum summoned at the same time, you can double this card's attack. And once per turn you can target one monster on the field, banish both it and this card from the field until your next standby phase. Well, who would have thought a mini Psyframe Lord card? Yeah, you can basically steal an opponent's monster temporarily. Well, remove it from your from existence for temporary in order to deal with the opponent's other stuff, which the monster might be protecting. But good luck if the said monster can't be targeted, which is the issue of the stuff this thing wants to remove most of the time. So yeah. Next up we have Noble Dragon Magician. It's a scale 5 and it blows up if you don't have another Magician card in your Pendulum zone, which is its only Pendulum effect. And it's a Pendulum Tuner monster, and this one cannot be used as a Synchro material except for the Synchro summon of a Dragon type Synchro monster. If this card is used as a Synchro material, unless all other Synchro materials are Odd Eyes monsters, place this card on the bottom of the deck. If this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can target one level 7 or higher odd eyes monster you control, reduce its level by 3, and if you do, special summon this card. Yeah, this is one of the best Pendulum Magician monsters in terms of being tuners, because most other Pendulum tuner monsters banish themselves upon being used after a synchro play, while this one just places itself on the bottom of the deck, which you can basically then proceed to search her out again if you need the synchro summon again. She also has a pretty sweet summoning condition, which also works from the graveyard as well, which is always a plus, but still I wouldn't advise maxing out on it, because one can be more than enough, and there are much more consistent searching options in order to bring her out consistently, other than resorting to running multiples, which can clog up your hand on occasion. And the final level 3 is an odd eyes card, that being... Cut me off already, and we're not even halfway there with the card lineup. Yeah, it's gonna be a long video. Anyway, like I said, the last level 3 is Odd Eyes Mirage Dragon. It's a scale 8, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn, if a face-up Odd Eyes pendulum monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can destroy one card in your pendulum zone. And if you do, place one face-up Odd Eyes pendulum monster in your extra deck in your pendulum zone, except Odd Eyes Mirage Dragon. And its monster effect is, while an Odd Eyes card is in your pendulum zone, quick effect, you can target one Odd Eyes monster you control. The first time it will be destroyed by battle or card effect, this turn it is not destroyed. And you can only use this effect of Odd Eyes Mirage Dragon once per turn. It's definitely on the weirder side of things, since it's they're on the only Odd Eyes low-level monsters, where most other Odd Eyes monsters tend to be high-level monsters. For all intensive purposes, it does the job pretty well, but I wouldn't advise maxing out on it, because, well, there are much better options to go by. Next up, we'll go on to the level 4s, first of which we have Wisdom Eye Magician. And it's a scale 5, and its pendulum effect is that if you have a Magician or Performapal card in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy this card, and if you do, place one Magician pendulum monster from your deck in your pendulum zone, except Wisdom Eye. And its monster effect is that you can discard it and target one card in your pendulum zone whose current pendulum scale is different from its original pendulum scale. Its pendulum scale becomes its original pendulum scale until the end of this turn. The second effect, the monster effect, basically exists in order to fix the pendulum monsters in terms of making their pendulum scales their original pendulum scales, if they actually were altered to not be on your liking. If you have two monsters which don't like each other in the pendulum zone, so they purposefully made increased or decreased their pendulum scales, so you can pendulum summon the monsters you'd like, and barely anyone uses him for this effect. The best way to use this card is to basically place it in your pendulum zone, and you basically then get to place any other Magician pendulum monster in your pendulum scale, which is a very good effect, since, well, it lets you freely choose monsters you want in your pendulum scale, which is a good effect. I'm kind of repeating myself here, because I am hinting that this destruction effect can also trigger the effect of a certain other monster, which we'll get into later. So yeah, it's a good card, and it also happened to be one of the most expensive cards during the time the Pendulum Magicians were the hip and cool shit. So yeah. Next up we have the retrain of a Tuning Magician, that being Harmonizing Magician. This is a level 4 scale 8, and its pendulum effect is that all monsters you control gain 100 attack and defense for each face-up Magician pendulum monster with different names in your extra deck. And its monster effect, it's a tuner as well, is that it cannot be special summoned from the extra deck, cannot be used as a material for a fusion, synchro, or xyz summon unless all other materials are Magician pendulum monsters. When this card is pendulum summoned from the field, You can special summon one Magician Pendulum monster from your deck in defense position except Harmonizing Magician, but its effects are negated. Also banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use this effect of Harmonizing Magician once per turn. It's basically a 2 or 3 of staple in the Pendulum Magician build because it offers so much utility and swarming capability to the archetype, and even fetches stuff from the deck. It's so good that in the OCG it's actually limited, so yeah. It's a great card, and it doesn't banishes itself in order to when it's Pendulum summoned. So yeah, great card indeed. Next up we have Xiang Sheng Magician. This is another scale 8, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target a face-up Xyz monster you control and one level 5 or higher monster you control. That Xyz monster's rank becomes equal to the level of that level 5 or higher monster until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. While you control more cards than your opponent does, this card's pendulum scale becomes 4. And its monster effect is that your opponent takes no damage from attacks involving this card, and once per turn you can target one other face-up monster you control. This card's attack becomes equal to that monster's current attack until the end of this turn. It's basically made to crash into stuff, or to basically get rid of stuff which this thing can get rid of at the time of this thing's effect getting triggered. And the second effect exists as a gimmick in order to basically we need to take a look at her pair Pendulum monster, which we'll get into later since it's a level 7 monster, which basically turns Xyz monsters into level monsters in order to use them alongside another monster of the same level in order for an Xyz summon, because they have some Xyz monsters which whose effects only trigger when they have Xyz monsters, when Xyz monsters were used as material for summoning them. So yeah. Next up we have, oh boy, Double Iris Magician. This one is quite famous. It's another scale 8, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target a dark spellcaster type monster you control. Apply this effect to it. It can destroy this card, and once per turn, double any battle damage that monster inflicts to your opponent this turn if it battles an opponent's monster. Its monster effect is that it is always treated as a Pendulum Dragon card. And if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can add one star Pendulum Graph card from your deck to your hand. Pendulum Graphs are actually type and part of the spell and trap lineup the archetype has. And the important thing to note here is that this is one of the human incarnation of the 4-dimension dragons, which is, frankly enough, this guy represents Odd Eyes Dragon, I mean Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon, and this one also happens to be banned at the moment due to its pendulum effect getting abused in various FTK and OTK types of decks. And its monster effect does come in handy quite a few times, since Pendulum Graphs do have pretty decent effects. So yeah. Next up we have Black Fang Magician, which is treated as an Xyz Dragon card, basically replicating Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon. And its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls. Its attack becomes half its current attack until the end of this turn, then you can destroy this card. And its monster effect that is, if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target one dark spellcaster monster in your graveyard and special summon it. You basically run 3 of these because not only does he recover all your Pendulum Magicians from your graveyard, but he also works on any dark spellcaster type monster, which opens up some splash ability options. So yeah, it's a very great card indeed. Next up we have the also adorable White Wing Magician. This is a level 4, which is a scale 1, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn, when an activated card or effect that resolves that targets a dark spellcaster type monster you control, negate that effect, then destroy this card. And its monster effect is, yeah, of course, it's a Synchro Dragon card, since it replicates Clearwing Synchro Dragon. And its monster effect is that if it is pendulum summoned and used for a synchro summon, you can banish it. Yeah, the monster effect is basically irrelevant, since, well, you'll be doing your best in order to avoid it. So yeah, you basically run it mostly due to the fact, due to the pendulum effect, or to use it as material for Zark. So yeah. Next up we have the representative of the Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, that being Purple Poison Magician. This is scale 1, which has the Pendulum effect that once per turn, if your Dark Spellcaster type monster battles, during damage calculation, you can activate this effect. That opponent's monster gains 1200 attack, and until the end of the damage step, then destroy this card. And its monster effect is that if it is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target one face-up card on the field and destroy it. It's basically a worse man-eater bug with the monster effect, since it specifically needs to be destroyed by battle or card effect in order to destroy a card, which is. But it has its own charm, and it's basically ran because its effects are overall genuinely nice to have, or you usually use it as material for Zark. So yeah. And speaking of Zark, the archetype got a Pendulum Magician, which actually represents Zark, and that is Performapal Empyrean Magician, which is another level 4, which has also a scale 8, and its Pendulum effect is when exactly one fusion, synchro, or exceeds monster you control that was special summoned from the extra deck is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you can special summon the destroyed monster, then destroy this card. You can only use the Pendulum effect of Performapal Empyrean Magician once per turn. And its monster effect is that during your main phase, if this card was normal or special summoned this turn, you can activate this effect. Apply these effects for the rest of the turn depending on the number of card types of the other monsters you currently control. Fusion. This card can attack directly. Synchro. Your opponent cannot activate monster effects. Exceeds. This card attack becomes double its original attack. And Pendulum. During the end phase, you can add one Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use the monster effect of Performapal Empyrean Magician once per turn. All of these are good effects, but the most relevant to come out of this one is basically the Synchro and Pendulum effects, since Synchro basically makes him immune to anything, shuts down monster effects, and the Pendulum effect basically gives you a search of any Pendulum monster in the game, which is always a plus in my books. So, yeah. Next up in the Supreme King lineup, we have Supreme King Dragon Darkworm. This is a scale 5, and its Pendulum effect is that once per turn, if you control no monsters, you can place one Supreme King Gate Pendulum monster from your deck in your Pendulum zone. Also, you cannot Pendulum summon monsters for the rest of the turn except dark monsters. And the monster effect is that if this card is normal or special summon, you can add a Supreme King Gate Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, and if this card is in your graveyard and you control no monsters, you can special summon this card from your graveyard, and you can only use the effect you can only use each monster effect of Supreme King Gate, the Supreme King Dragon Darkworm, once per turn. This card also happens to be limited in the OCG due to causing, again, some searching shenanigans and loops involving Supreme King Gate Pendulum monsters, and due to being abused in basically any dragon deck which can afford to abuse his effects. So yeah. Other than this, it's usually ran at 2 or 3 of these in a dedicated Zark build, which is the most viable deck a way to play the deck now that Pepe is gone. So yeah. Now we're returning to the Performapals for a bit of a long bit. First of which we have Performapal Radish Horse. This is scale 3, and its Pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls and one Performapal monster you control. That opponent's monster loses attack equal to the attack of that Performapal monster you control, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that if your opponent controls a special summon monsters and controls at least as many monsters as you can special summon this card from your hand. And once per turn, you can target one face-up monster on each player's field until the end of this turn. That opponent's monster loses attack equal to this card's attack, and if it does, that monster you control gains attack equal to this card's attack. Okay, the special summoning first is barely achievable, since you tend to always control more monsters than your opponent. So yeah, unless you're like going second and you barely provide enough monster in order for this thing to have its special summoning condition ready, which is a bit of a silly game state to observe and focus on. So yeah, it basically is also a very gimmicky attack manipulation effect, which again can all things considered edge you closer to a victory, but overall it's bottom line pointless. So yeah. Next up we have Performapal Coin Dragon. It's a scale 5, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target a dragon type monster you control that was special summoned from the extra deck. This turn that monster you control if that monster you control battles an opponent's monster, banish that opponent's monster after the damage step after the damage calculation, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that other dragon type monsters you control gain 500 attack, also they cannot be destroyed by card effects. It's alright, but I wish it was but I wish it did anything else. Its monster effect is just there, it's nothing special. It boosts all dragon type monsters, which is kind of funny, which I believe was intentional because they wanted you to promote playing the post-Zark Yuya deck where he used all the Dimension Dragons during in the epilogue, which again didn't stand for much unless you specifically talk about the final duel between Yuya and Reiji. But yeah, it's basically the pendulum effect is also a bit too specific, so yeah, it's not a very good choice in my opinion, and basically is a very format dependent card. Next up we have Performapal Camelump. It's a scale 2, and once per turn during your main phase 1, you can target one face-up monster you control. The monsters your opponent can currently control lose 800 defense until the end of this turn, and if they do, if the targeted monster attacks the defense position, monster inflict piercing damage, and these effects remain even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect that if it is destroyed by battle, you can make the monster that destroyed it lose 800 attack. Both of these effects are very outdated and have no place in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So let's just move on. Next up we have Performapal Fireflux. It's another scale 5, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you contribute one Performapal monster and negate the attack, then end the battle phase. And its monster effect is that if a Performapal or odd-eyes monster you control attacks, your opponent cannot activate any spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. Most of the monsters you tend to go and partake in battle already have this sort of effect built in the monster effect of Fireflux, and the pendulum effect can be pretty decent battle ending effect, and it can be useful, but I genuinely wouldn't advise running it. Next up we have Performapal Odd-Eyes Minotaurus. It's a scale 6 this time around, and its pendulum effect is that if a Performapal monster or Odd-Eyes monster attacks the defense position monster, it inflicts piercing damage. And its monster effect is that during damage calculation, if your pendulum monster attacks an opponent's monster, you can make that opponent's monster lose 100 attack for each Performapal and or Odd-Eyes monster you control during damage calculation only. It's a completely irrelevant type of effect, since the pendulum effect basically won't win you any games in the Link focused era, since defense position monsters are basically non-existent, and the monster effect is very clunky and inconsistent attack gaining effect, so no, not thank you. Next up we have Performapal Swing Cobra. It's another scale 2 with 300 attack and 800 defense, and once per turn when a monster you control inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can send the top card of your opponent's deck to the graveyard. And its monster effect that this card can attack your opponent directly, and if this card attacks, it is changed to defense position at the end of the battle phase. It's just Submarineroid, even though it has way less attack points than Submarineroid, so yeah. Don't get me wrong, you can actually buff this thing with equips, unlike a Submarineroid, in order to turn him into a massive direct attacker, but that would incentivize building a deck around this thing, so it's generally not worth it. Also, the pendulum effect is heavily outdated, since you're just basically giving an opponent free graveyard setup, so no. Next up we have Performapal Yugo Golem. This is a scale 1, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn, if a monster is fusion summoned to your field except during the damage step, you can add one Performapal, Odd Eyes, or Magician pendulum monster from your graveyard or face up in your extra deck to your hand. And its monster effect is that once per turn during your main phase, if this card was pendulum summoned this turn, you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using this card you control and add dragon monsters that you control as fusion materials. It's basically another version of Trump Witch, but this one requires to be specifically pendulum summoned in order to work, and its pendulum effect is basically a search effect which happens very rarely since you don't tend to summon fusion monsters other than Supreme King Zark. So yeah. Next up we have another notorious little guy, that being Performapal Skullcrobat Joker. This is a level 8, and its pendulum effect is that you cannot pendulum summon monsters except Performapal monsters, Magician, Pendulum monsters, and Odd Eyes monsters, and this effect cannot be negated. And its monster effect is when it's normal summoned, you can add a Performapal monster, a Magician, Pendulum monster, Odd Eyes monster from your deck to your hand, and except this guy. And yes, as you all probably know, this guy is banned, and banned for a very good reason. This guy literally searches out your entire archetype at the cost of your normal summon, and his pendulum effect is basically non-existent since you're only allowed to pendulum summon the members of the archetype. So yeah, definitely run it if you happen to see him get freed from the clutches of the Konami's ban list. Next up we have Performapal Silverclaw. It's a scale 5, and it has the pendulum effect that all Performapal monsters you control gain 300 attack. And its monster effect is when it declares an attack, all Performapal monsters you currently control gain 300 attack until the end of the battle phase. Yeah, pointless battle boosts effect which are irrelevant in the slightest. So yeah. A bit more valuable in that department is Performapal Goldfang. It's also a level 4, but this one is a scale 3. And its pendulum effect is that once per turn, if your Performapal monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. And its monster effect is that if it's normal or special summoned, or Performapal monsters you currently control gain 200 attack until the end of this turn. I said more tolerable, not too amazing, because it basically is a bit of a better version of Silverclaw at the cost of only working on Performapals, which is a bit tragic in my opinion. So yeah. Next up we have the final level 4, that being Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer. This is a scale 2, and its pendulum effect is that if a Performapal monster is pendulum summoned to your field, all pendulum monsters you currently control gain 1000 attack until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is if it's a special summon, you can target up to 2 cards you control, destroy it, and if you do, add Performapal monsters with different names from your deck or onto your hand, except Performapal Pendulum Sorcerer, equal to the number of cards destroyed. You can only use this effect once per turn. And yeah, back in the day, this used to be at the top playmaker of the Performapal engine due to the fact that he can give you 2 searches upon him being pendulum summoned, and he was the key star playmaker in Pepe decks. So yeah, great card, but fell out of relevance due to the fact that rarely anyone now pendulum summons in the lake-focused meta. Next up we have Performapal Partnaga, our first level 5 monster. This is a scale 3, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target one face-up monster you control. It gains 300 attack for each Performapal card you currently control until the end of this turn. And its monster effect, that is if it is normal or special summon, you can target a monster you control. It gains 300 attack for each Performapal monster you currently control, and level 5 or lower monsters cannot attack. Yeah, this is a very weird attack boosting kind of effect, which also happens to lock out level 5 or lower monsters from attacking, which is a clever idea, as in to encourage big bad boss monsters to attack. But the problem lies in the fact that the monsters that will be most present on the board don't even have levels, so yeah, it's not very good. Next up we have Performapal Drummerilla. This is a scale 2 as well, and once per turn you can target, when an attack is declared involving a monster you control and an opponent's monster, you can target that monster you control. It gains 600 attack until the end of the battle phase, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that if no monsters are on the field, you can normal summon this card without tributing. And if this card is normal summoned without tributing, its level becomes 4. And once per turn, when an attack is declared involving a monster you control when an opponent's on an opponent's monster, you can target that monster you control. It gains 600 attack until the end of the battle phase. Its pendulum effect and monster effects are essentially the same, except the monster effect has the addition of its alternate summoning condition as a level 4 monster, so yeah. But still, I wouldn't advise running it due to it being a bricky level 5 monster, which is pretty much dead if you have more monsters on the field, and that's probably going to be happening a lot in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Next up we have Performapal Gungamuton. This is another level 5. It's a scale 1 this time, and it has 2400 defense, which is pretty alright for a level 5. Anyway, its pendulum effect is that once per turn when an attack is declared involving a monster you control and an opponent's monster, you can activate this effect. That monster you control cannot be destroyed by that battle. And its monster effect is that once per turn when an attack is declared involving a card you control and an opponent's monster, you can activate this effect. That monster you control cannot be destroyed by that battle. So, alright. It's you most likely using you're most likely going to be using its pendulum effect all the more often because well, this is a level 5 we're talking about. Yeah, sure, you can pendulum summon it, but come on. You're probably not going to be wasting your monster spaces for a level 5 monster, which doesn't offer any additional benefits. So, yeah. Again, decent card at best. Next up, we have Performapal Daggerman, and I really wish that this guy was called Dabberman instead. It would be make a cute pun, and it would actually make a cute reference to Dobermans. So yeah, and I'm bringing it up because I really love doggies. Anyway, next let's go on to this card's effect, which is its pendulum effect. It's a scale 2 first of all. And its pendulum effect is that during your main phase, if this card was activated this turn, you can target a Performapal monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand, and you can only use this effect of Daggerman once per turn. And its monster effect is that during your main phase, if this card was pendulum summoned, you can send one Performapal monster from your hand to the graveyard and draw one card. And you can only use this effect of Daggerman once per turn. Yeah, you basically run a lizard draw for this thing's monster effect, so it's outdated in this department. And the pendulum effect is basically a recycling tool, which the archetype has better options and accesses to. So, yeah, I wouldn't advise this one. Next up, we have Performapal Cell Shell Crab, which is another level 5, and it has this effect. It's a scale 2, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn when a Performapal monster you control is destroyed by battle, you can target the one Performapal or odd ice card in your pendulum zone, special summon it. And once per turn, this is the monster effect, you can target one pendulum monster you control. It gains 300 attack for each Performapal monster you control until the end of this turn. It's a level 5 with pretty gargantuan stats for a level 5, and it also happens to have a pretty bizarre kind of monster effect, since, well, you basically, it works on pendulum monsters, which basically you can basically increase the attack of any pendulum monsters by 300, provided that your field is filled up with Performapals, which basically falls in the same level of usefulness as Partnaga, since if you run Performapals, they tend to be used up for extra deck plays. And the pendulum effect is a straight up a free monster, which is which basically gets you a free Odd Eyes monster most of the time, since those tend to be in the Pendulum Zone, or a Magician monster straight onto the field, which you do want at times, but not all the time, since basically magicians were basically made to remain in Pendulum Zones. So yeah, run by preference in my opinion. Next up we have Performapal Odd Eyes Light Phoenix. And it's a scale 3 monster, and when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack pendulum effect while you have a card in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy the card in the other pendulum zone, and if you do, special summon this card. And this monster effect is a quick effect that you contribute this card and target one Performapal monster you control. It gains 1000 attack until the end of this turn. You usually use the monster effect, which you tend to basically this used to be main trigger for Performage Plush Fire's effect back in Pepe decks, but now, since Plush Fire is chilling away in the ban jail, it's irrelevant and you basically don't run this. Alright, now next up we have Odd Eyes Persona Dragon. This is a level 5 monster, level 5 Odd Eyes, which is a bit weird to see. And basically it's a scale 1 with the pendulum effect that once per turn during the end phase, if your opponent activated a card or effect this turn that targeted an Odd Eyes Pendulum monster you control and no other cards, while this card is in your Pendulum Zone, special summon this card, and if you do, place one face-up Odd Eyes Pendulum monster from your extra deck in your Pendulum Zone, except Odd Eyes Persona Dragon. And its monster effect that is once per turn quick effect, you can target one face-up monster on the field that was special summoned from the extra deck. It has its effects negated until the end of this turn. The monster effect is basically outclassed by Forbidden Chalice, and the pendulum effect is the thing you most likely are going to use with this thing if you actually choose to run it, since its level is a bit on the stale side. Odd Eyes usually don't like running any monsters which are lower than level 7, so yeah. Finding the use of this for this guy can be a bit of a hassle, so run by preference in my opinion. Next up we have Acrobatic Magician. We're returning to the Magician lineup, and it's a scale 2, and its pendulum effect is that when a monster you control is destroyed by a card effect except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your Pendulum Zone, and can only use this effect of Acrobatic Magician once per turn. And if the activation of a spell or trap card is negated except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and when this card is destroyed by battle, you can place this card in your Pendulum Zone. It's a bit of a funny summoning condition with this card's monster effect, since it's very reminiscent of the Naturia archetype. Sure, it's very meta relevant to be negating effects, but other than the extra deck monsters and some very specific back row pieces in this archetype, the archetype doesn't have many options in order to go by. Yeah, sure, you can tech him in if you feel like it, and if you feel like you can pull off the special summoning condition consistently, feel free. I don't blame you if you want to try and have fun, but yeah, watch out for the ratios in that regard. Next up we have Stargazer Magician, the pair pendulum of Time Gazer. This is a scale 1, which pendulum effect is the exact same as Time Gazer Magician, except you don't need to control no monsters in order to activate the card. It negates spell cards during the battle phase when a pendulum monster battles, and unless you have another Magician or Odd Eyes card in your other Pendulum Zone, this card becomes a scale 4. And its monster effect is that once per turn, when exactly one other pendulum monster you control and no other cards is returned to the hand by an opponent's card effect except during the damage step, you can special summon one monster from your hand with the same name as the returned card to the hand. It basically returns a bounce effect, and that's it, and which makes it very specific, just like Time Gazer. Well, Time Gazer is admittedly better, but yeah. You generally, again, use this as a scale target in order to use his pendulum effect. Alright, we're at card 100, which is Performapal King Bear, and I really need to take a bit of a break in the recording when between these, because This is the highest amount of cards I've gotten to in any archetype analysis. So yeah. After I review this, I'll take a little bit of a break, and then I'll be go back to reviewing. It's a scale 7, and its pendulum effect is once per turn during the end phase. If this card was activated this turn, you can destroy it, and if you do, you can add one level 7 or higher monster to your hand that is either in your graveyard or face up in your extra deck. And its monster effect is that it cannot be destroyed with spell or trap effects while in face up attack position, and it gains 100 attack for each Performapal card you control, and during your battle phase only. This thing actually sees tons of play in non-pendulum decks due to the fact that its pendulum effect searches out any level 7 or higher monster from the graveyard or face up from the extra deck, which makes it very splashable in various stuff that can afford to have this kind of effect around. And not to mention that in pure Performapal decks, this can basically become a pretty formidable beatstick. So yeah. If you're building a pure Performapal deck, feel free to run a couple of these, since I would have wished if it was a level 7, so rank 7 plays and all that, but still, a small rank 6 engine is always welcome, such as number 61 Volcasaurus. Their next monster is Performapal Bubble Bow Wow. This is a a scale 5 once again. And another level 6, and its pendulum effect is that if a face-up non-pendulum monster you control that was special summoned from the extra deck would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can destroy this card instead. And its monster effect that when it is special summoned from the extra deck, you can activate this effect. For the rest of this turn, pendulum monsters you control that were special summoned from the extra deck cannot be destroyed by card effects. In pendulum focused heavy decks, this is basically a godsend, but those said pendulum monsters tend to be used up as extra deck material, so yeah, questionable if this effect is even applicable. Next up we have another notorious one, that being Performapal Monkey Board. This is a scale 1 with 1000 attack and 2400 defense, and unless you have a Performapal card in your other pendulum zone, this card's pendulum scale becomes 4. During your main phase, if this card was activated this turn, you can add one level 4 or lower Performapal monster from your deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And its monster effect is that you can discard, then reveal one Performapal or odd-eyes monster in your hand, and if you do, reduce the levels of all monsters in your hand with that name by 1 for the rest of this turn, even after they are normal summoned or set. The monster effect is basically another victim of a discount cost down, which is, again, you don't tend to use it for this effect. However, this guy is banned, and for a very good reason, due to his pendulum effect enabling, well, basically giving you off a free search, and you basically locked into a hard once per turn, because, well, if you could actually bounce back this guy and keep activating him, in order, you'll be getting tons and tons of searches off, which is understandable why they decided to basically lock it into a hard once per turn. And yeah, this guy is banned because also this was the key playmaker in the Pepe decks, and basically one of the main cogs in the Pepe engine. Nowadays, Pepe can't function properly with this guy on chilling in the ban list, so yeah. Next up we have Performapal Kaleidoscope. It's a scale 4, and its only pendulum effect is that all light monsters you control gain 300 attack. Oh boy. And its monster effect is that once per turn you can target a face-up monster you control. This turn it can attack all special summon monsters your opponent controls once each. If this was like an integrated effect onto level 4 monsters when it was used as a material for an extra deck summon, or an implemented effect on an extra deck monster, I would have called it good. And not to mention that the pendulum effect is, well, barely relevant, since Performapals really don't care about light monsters, so yeah, it's not a good card. Next up we have Performapal Labellman. And this is another level 6 with scale 1, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can increase the levels of all pendulum summon monsters you are currently controlled by 1, and even if this card leaves the field. And once per turn you can declare a level of pendulum monster effect, a level from 1 to 5, then target one other Performapal monster you control until the end of this turn. Reduce this card's level by the declared level, and if you do, increase the level of the other monster by the same amount. Yeah, this is one of the craziest level changer effects I've ever seen in a well, archetype that's not focused that much on XC spamming, and yeah, you have to put in genuine effort in order for this card to function properly, which again is debatable. You could actually build a deck around this card in order for it to use it properly. So yeah, not worth it in my opinion. Next up we have Performapal Splash Mammoth. This is another scale 4 card, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn, when a fusion monster is fused special summoned to your side of the field except during the damage step, you can special summon one face-up odd-eyes pendulum monster from your extra deck, and the monster effect is that during your main phase you can fusion summon one dragon type fusion monster from your extra deck by using the monsters you control as fusion materials, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Splash Mammoth once per duel. Uh, this is one of those cards which basically gives you a polyless contact fusion without using itself as material, kind of like Trump Witch's pendulum effect, but you specifically need to get this guy out on the field in order to do so. And not to mention, this thing is also a once per duel effect for some reason, and it also happens to have terrible stats for a level 6. And yeah, the most relevant usage I can think of is summoning a certain other monster which can already be summoned by contact fusion without this thing, so yeah, this is as redundant as it gets. Next up we have Dragon Magician. It's a scale 2 Pendulum Magician, and if you have a Magician card in your other Pendulum zone, you can add one face-up Magician or odd-eyes Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, except Dragon Magician. You can only use this effect of Dragon Magician once per turn. If this card is normal or special summon monster effect, you can target one Magician Pendulum monster or odd-eyes monster in your graveyard, except Dragon Magician added to your hand. You can only use this effect of Dragon Magician once per turn. Okay, so this is a level 6 Magician monster, which is fine. It offers some nice recycling for your odd-eyes and Magicians, which would be fine if this was a level 7 monster, since odd-eyes tend to have a lot of rank 7 setups. So yeah, I would have loved this a hell of a lot more if this was actually a level 7 monster, but it isn't, so it's truly an oof into the stomach. And next up we have Chronograph Sorcerer, our last level 6. It's a scale 8, and its pendulum effect is that during your main phase you can destroy this card, and if you do, take one Time Gazer Magician from your hand or deck and either place it in your pendulum zone or special summon it. You can only use this effect of Chronograph Sorcerer once per turn. And its monster effect is that if a card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand, then you can special summon a monster from your hand. And you can banish this card you control plus 4 monsters from your hand, the field and or graveyard, one each with Pendulum Dragon, Xyz Dragon, Synchro Dragon, and Fusion Dragon in their names. And special summon one Supreme King Zark from your extra deck, and this card is treated as a fusion summon. So yeah, this guy is used to bring out the titular Supreme King Zark by employing the so-called integration summon, as it's known in the anime. But the Zark didn't use Chronograph Sorcerer. In fact, Chronograph Sorcerer didn't even appear in the anime. But still, it's a good card that's even limited in the OCG, and you're basically required to use this one right now, because our boy Astrograph Sorcerer, our first level 7, happens to be banned at the moment. So let's check out why. It's a scale 1, and its for pendulum effect is the exact same shit as Chronograph, only it works on Stargazer Magician. And its monster effect is that if a card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon it, just like Chronograph. Then you can choose one monster in your graveyard, extra deck, or that is banished, and that was destroyed this turn, and add one monster with the same name from your deck to your hand. You can banish this card to perform the exact same shit as Chronograph to summon Zark. Yeah, this card is banned for a very good reason, because it has the absolute best and most powerful searching effect ever known to man in the card game, because it can add literally any monster to your hand from anywhere, as long as it was destroyed this turn. So yeah, in dedicated build which offer lots of searching, which aren't even centered around Zark, Astrograph Sorcerer was a 3 of staple due to its searching being very heavily popular, and not to mention it's level 7, so rank 7 plays, and not to mention it's a pretty beefy beatstick. So yeah, if it ever comes off of the ban list, you should always consider running this guy. Next up, we have Dharma Eye Magician, the pair pendulum of the Wisdom Eye Magician. It's a scale 2, and once per turn you can reveal one pendulum monster in your hand, then target one magician card in your pendulum zone. That target's pendulum scale becomes the same as the revealed pendulum monsters until the end of this turn, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is that while this pendulum summoned card is on the field, magician pendulum monsters you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects during the turn this card was pendulum summoned. The protection effect is outclassed by several other cards in the archetype in its monster effect, and its pendulum effect is basically a way slower version of the Wisdom Eye's discard effect. So yeah, no wonder this wasn't included in the Pendulum Magician structure deck. Next up we have Dragon Caller Magician. Once per turn, you can target one face-up monster on the field. Pendulum effect. It becomes Dragon type until your opponent's turn. Until the end of your opponent's turn, even if this card leaves the field. This is a scale 2, and its monster effect is that once per turn, you can make this card become Dragon type until the end of this turn. A monster that was Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz summoned using this card as on the field as Xyz as material gains this effect. If this card battles a Dragon-type monster, this card's attack becomes double its original attack during the damage step only. Very format-dependent material effect, and it doesn't even include links, because this thing came out while links were still in production and weren't revealed in the public. So I would hear, but yeah, you basically. If you really want to build your decks around this guy, you basically need to run this thing along stuff like DNA Surgery and other stuff like that. Next up we have Xiang K Magician. This is the pair pendulum of Xiang Sheng Magician, and it's a scale 3, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target one face-up Xyz monster you control. This turn you can use it as an Xyz material for an Xyz summon using its rank as if it were a level, even if this card leaves the field. And its monster effect is once per turn during either player's turn you can target one light monster on the field. That face-up monster has its effects negated until the end of this turn. Was the monster effect supposed to be Ally of Justice support? Because that's the only relevant thing I can basically think about when I talk about this card's monster effect. And its pendulum effect is basically essential to this deck's playstyle, as two of their best Xyz monsters, well, one of their best Xyz monsters, not the other one not so much, but still worth enough, requires an Xyz monster to be used as an Xyz material in order to gain additional effects. So this is basically ran strictly for its pendulum effect, and is never ever summoned unless it's an absolute emergency and you're playing against like heavy light spamming decks such as Lightsworns or something. Alright, we've been hyping him up for so long right now, and now it's finally time for us to talk about him. The titular 4th Dimension Dragon, the Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon, the final Dimension Dragon. It's a scale 4, and its pendulum effect is that you can reduce the battle damage you take from an attack involving a pendulum monster you control to 0, and during the end phase you can destroy this card, and if you do, add one pendulum monster with 1500 attack or less attack from your deck to your hand, and you can only use each pendulum effect of Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon once per turn. And its monster effect is that if it battles an opponent's monster, any battle damage this card inflicts to your opponent is doubled. So yeah, you most likely run this card as like material for other stuff that that either require it specifically as material or any odd eyes monster as material. Also, its pendulum effect actually happens to be very splashable and non-archetype for Alliance, since it can search out any pendulum monster with 1500 or less, such as one of their best monsters, some of their best magician monsters, the Supreme King Gates, everything basically that you might require. Its other version, the Supreme King variant, the Supreme King Dragon Odd Eyes, has the exact same scale and stats as the original Odd Eyes, and its pendulum effect is a bit different. You can tribute a Supreme King Dragon monster, destroy this card, and if you do, add a pendulum monster with 1500 attack or less from your deck to your hand. And its monster effect is that you can tribute two Supreme King Dragon monsters, special summon this card from your hand, and if your pendulum monster battles an opponent's monster, any battle damage it inflicts to your opponent is doubled, and during any battle phase, quick effect, you can tribute this card to special summon up to two face-up Supreme King Dragon and or Supreme King Gate pendulum monsters from your extra deck in defense position except Supreme King Dragon Odd Eyes. Unlike all other Supreme King monsters from the anime, only it and the Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon counterparts, the possessed versions of them, carried out the titular tag-out effect into two Dark Worms, while for some reason Clearwing and Starving Venom didn't. So I'm not sure why. However, I'm not entirely sure about this, but there is a unique effect that I think was added onto Supreme King Clearwing, but we'll get to that in a second. The pendulum effect this time is a bit more costly, but they balanced it out by not giving it a once per turn, a strict once per turn, and it's not even once per turn at all. And the monster effect basically turns Supreme King Zark into a 8000 attack beatstick if he happens to attack into a 0 attack token, which is always funny to notice. So yeah, basically turns your pendulum monsters into basically double damage dealers. So yeah, it's also nice to consider it as an Aura Darkness target if you really have no other options for draw power, even though it's highly welcome in this deck. So yeah, it's always welcome to run it in a dedicated Zark build. Next up, we've come to the titular Supreme King Gates, first of which is 0. It's a scale 0, of course, with 0 attack and defense, 0, 0, 0. And its pendulum effect is that if you control Supreme King Zark, you take no damage. Once per turn, if you have a Supreme King Gate Infinity in your other pendulum zone, you can destroy both cards in your pendulum zones, and if you do, add one polymerization spell card or one fusion spell card from your deck to your hand. And its monster effect is that once per turn you can target one other face-up card you control, destroy both it and this card, and if you do, special summon one Dragon-type fusion or one Synchro monster from your extra deck, but its attack and defense becomes 0. It has its effects negated, also cannot be used as material for a Synchro or Xyz summon, and if this card in the monster zone is destroyed by battle or card effect, you place it and this card in your pendulum zone. Yeah, I'm not going to make any further notices here until I talk about Supreme King Gate Infinity, because the context is heavily necessary. It's a scale 13 monster, so if you basically have Supreme King Gate 0 and Infinity, you basically can summon every single level in existence. And it's another level 7, and if you control a monster you cannot pendulum summon, this effect cannot be negated, and once per turn if you control Supreme King Zark, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls, gain life points equal to its attack. And monster effect is that once per turn you can target one face-up card you control, destroy both it and this card, and if you do, special summon one Dragon-type Xyz or Pendulum monster from your extra deck, but its attack and defense become 0. It has its effects negated. Also, it cannot be used as material for a Synchro or Xyz summon, and if this card in the monster zone is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. So basically, if you pendulum summon these, you're basically guaranteed 2-dimension dragons straight away, and basically you would tend to summon an Xyz and fusion monster with this, and the pendulum dragon can easily be searched out, and then you can use basically any type of engine to summon either the fusion or synchro. Most probably you'll be summoning the synchro monster the most regular way, and then you get to destroy both these in your Pendulum Zone to get a fusion in order to get Supreme King Dragon's Arc out. That is, if you can't afford to spend that Chronograph Sorcerer along with the 4 magicians that represent each of the dragons. So yeah, still it's very much worth running. Darkworm can search it out, both of them. So yeah, also the Supreme King Gate 0 negates every damage you take. Well, you have Zark out, which is beyond fantastic to me, and Supreme King Gate Infinity is just rubbing in the opponent's face that you can gain life points each turn, even though you just don't need it. Next up we have Odd Eyes Phantom Dragon, and it's another level 7, and it's the last level 7. It's a scale 4, has the exact same stats as the original Pendulum Dragon, and once per turn when an attack is declared involving your face-up monster, Pendulum Effect, and an opponent's monster, if you have an Odd Eyes card in your other Pendulum Zone, you can make that opponent's you control gain 1200 attack until the end of the battle phase, even if this card leaves the field. And monster effect is that when this Pendulum Summon card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by attacking, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to the number of Odd Eyes cards in your Pendulum Zones times 1200, and you can only use this effect of Odd Eyes Phantom Dragon once per turn. This is like, if you have 2 Odd Eyes cards, you're basically guaranteed a 2400 burn damage, which is beyond hilarious, just because, well, it just is. It's basically an Odd Eyes burn enabler, and it's basically a fun card to build an entire deck around. Honestly, you just give it a bunch more attack, just give Odd Eyes in the Pendulum Zone a lot of protection and search power, and yeah, you can basically build a very fun Odd Eyes burn card with this card. But other than that, in very run-of-the-mill Odd Eyes decks and Performapal or Magician decks, it's not very much recommended. Next up we have our first level 8, which is Odd Eyes Phantasma Dragon. And it's scale 0 as well, and its Pendulum effect is that you can discard 1 card to add 1 face-up dragon Pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect once per turn. And its monster effect is that if you have 2 cards in your Pendulum Zones and a face-up Odd Eyes monster and a face-up Odd Eyes Pendulum monster in your extra deck, you can special summon this card from your hand. You cannot Pendulum summon the turn you activate this effect. During damage calculation, if this card attacks an opponent's monster, you can make on that opponent's monster lose 1000 attack for each face-up Pendulum monster in your extra deck. During damage calculation only, and you can only use each effect of Odd Eyes Phantasma Dragon once per turn. Yeah, this is another very huge Odd Eyes beatstick, which honestly, like, also warrants an entire deck being built around it. So yeah, you can basically it's basically also a trade-in target, so that helps as well. It's a 3000 attack beatstick. It has a very unique special summoning condition, which is basically incentivizes you to build a very heavy pendulum focused deck, and well, an Odd Eyes deck at that. So yeah, run by preference. Next up we move on to the last batch of Performapals. We first off start off with Odd Eyes Dissolver. Performapal Odd Eyes Dissolver, which is a scale 4, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can fusion summon 1 dragon fusion monster from your extra deck by using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials. And its monster effect is that at the start of the damage step, if your pendulum monster battles an opponent's monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, your monster cannot be destroyed by that battle. And you can only use this effect once per turn, and during your main phase you can fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck by using this card you control as fusion material, as well as on other monsters you control or cards in your Pendulum Zones. You most likely run 1 or 2 of these because it has a pretty neat summoning condition, which can also result in your dragon monster getting protected by protected from the destruction during that battle phase. And not to mention fusion summoning can be very piece easy, since you can use monsters in your Pendulum Zones as materials. So You can so you can basically save up your monsters on the field for link plays or anything like that. So yeah, trade and target as well. So yeah. Next up we have Performapal Laugh Maker. This is a scale 5 and its pendulum effect is that once per turn if all your opponent controls a monster whose current attack is higher than its original attack, you can gain 1000 life points. And its monster effect is when this card declares an attack, you can make this card gain 1000 attack for each monster on the field whose current attack is higher than its original attack, except other monsters you control, until the end of the battle phase. And if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, while its current attack is higher than its original attack, you can target one monster in your graveyard, special summon it, and you can only use one monster effect of Performapal Laugh Maker once per turn, and only once that turn. The Laugh Maker name is completely appropriate because the pendulum effect straight up makes me laugh, while the monster effect sounds like something that will be barely usable but is, well, very difficult to set up. And not to mention that the floating effect can basically special summon any monster in your graveyard, which is, well, which is something that would be kind of broken, but due to the fact that you have what you need to do in order to achieve said effect, unless you're actively going out of your way in order to achieve it, makes it barely worth considering. Yeah, you usually don't tend to boost your monster's attack values in order to just like get a monster out of the graveyard. You basically use stuff like Monster Reborn in order to do stuff. Yeah, just outstanding card design. And now we move on to the last Performapal main deck monster, that being Performapal Smile Sorcerer, and it also happens to be the last level 8 monster. It's a scale 1, and its pendulum effect is if a monster you control whose current attack is higher than its original attack is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your pendulum zone, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Smile Sorcerer once per turn. And its monster effect is if it is normal or special summon, you can add one Smile spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. And if every monster you control is a Performapal or Odd Eyes monster or a Magician Pendulum monster, and this card's current attack is higher than its original attack, you can draw cards equal to the number of monsters you control whose attack is higher than their original attack. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn. You can only use each effect of Performapal Smile Sorcerer once per turn. Alright, so the whole deal about having a higher attack than about having monsters with higher attack than their original attack is segregated to these Smile support cards, which we'll get into later. And spoiler alert, they're barely worth running, as opposed to except one of them, which we'll get into in a bit. So yeah. Next up we have All Eyes Phantom Dragon. All eyes on him, folks. Yeah, this is a level 10 Odd Eyes monster with a scale 0, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn at the end of the damage step, if your dragon pendulum monster attacked an opponent's monster, you can activate this effect. It can attack once again in a row, and you cannot declare attacks the turn you activate this effect except with that monster. And its monster effect is that it cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned from your hand or face-up extra deck by tributing all monsters you control minimum 2, including a Dragon Pendulum monster. You can only special summon All Eyes Phantom Dragon once per turn this way. Once per turn during the damage calculation, if this card battles an opponent's monster, double this card's current attack until the end of this turn. Once per turn when an opponent activates a spell or trap or card effect, quick effect, you can send one spell or trap you control to the graveyard to negate the activation. Well, talk about the one monster who just drains you of resources just to become a shitty beatstick. Well, he doesn't gain any attack or anything, but you do get some nice shutdown effects, which you can achieve with some other monsters for a much bigger payoff in the end. So yeah, it's basically a gimmicky level 10, and it basically requires you to clear out your board in order to bring it out, which is not the way how modern Yu-Gi-Oh functions. Next up we have the final main deck, well, in massive quotes here, final main deck boss monster, we have Odd Eyes Revolution Dragon, which is a level 12 and a scale 12. And its pendulum effect is that you cannot pendulum summon monsters except dragon monsters, and this effect cannot be negated, and you can target one dragon, fusion, synchro, or Xyz monster in your graveyard, destroy this card, and if you do, special summon that monster. And its monster effect is that it cannot be normal summoned or set. It must either be pendulum summoned from the hand or special summoned from your hand by tributing 3 dragon monsters, 1 fusion, 1 synchro, and 1 Xyz. And you can discard this card and pay 500 life points and add 1 level 8 or lower dragon pendulum monster from your extra deck to your hand, and it gains attack equal to the attack and defense equal to half of your opponent's life points, and once per turn you can pay half your life points, shuffle all other cards on the field in the graveyards into the deck. Oh boy, it's basically a slightly weaker fiber jar at the cost of half of your life points and being generally useless. Again, it's one of those monsters which you just look at and say, oh, it's another one of those which I have to dedicate my entire deck around. So yeah, that's basically what it is. You have to you have to specifically build decks around this card in order for it to be functioning properly and being competitive in any shape or form. So yeah, most of the times you won't get the best results from this card because its summoning condition is way too difficult to pull off in Master Rule 4 unless you're like playing Adignisters with DNA surgeries. So yeah. Next up we have the final main deck monster, finally, which is actually a ritual monster, that being Odd Eyes Gravity Dragon. It's a level 7, which you can only ritual summon with Odd Eyes Advent. When this card is special summoned, you can return all spells and traps your opponent controls to the hand, and your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this effect activation. And you can only use this effect of Odd Eyes Gravity Dragon once per turn, and your opponent must pay 500 life points to activate card effects. It's actually a pretty funky lockdown card. You can also build your decks around, since, you know, rituals have gotten a lot more consistent since the old days, and they got the ever so consistent incantation engine, which can also give different buffs to your rituals. And not to mention, you can also clear out the opponent's back row. It doesn't matter if it's set or not. And your opponent also cannot do jack and shit while you activate this effect. And also you can, it basically becomes an opponent-only chain. It's chain energies, which I always adore. Basically punishes the player for playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So yeah, building a deck around Odd Eyes Gravity Dragon can be pretty fun. Next up we have the Odd Eyes Advent, which is the aforementioned ritual. And it pretty much functions like a ordinary ritual spell. You can tribute pendulum monsters this time, whose levels equal or exceed the level of the ritual monster you want to ritual summon. And if your opponent controls 2 or more monsters and you control no monsters, you can also send Odd Eyes monsters from your extra deck to the graveyard, and you can only use the effect of Odd Eyes Advent once per turn. So yeah, this is by the numbers ritual spell, even though it requires only pendulum monsters to work. You most likely always run pendulum monsters, so it's pretty okay in the activation conditions. And the sending 2 Odd Eyes from your extra deck can also set up some nice Zark plays if you actually run rituals in your Zark builds. And it basically set the foundation for what would later become one of the better fusion cards, in my opinion. So yeah, very glad it exists. So yeah. In the extra deck lineup, we start off with the fusion monsters, and we start off with our first level 7, that being Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon. It has the same stats as the original one, except this one has 3000 defense. It requires an Odd Eyes monster and a Pendulum monster as fusion material, and when this card is special summoned, you can target one opponent's face-up attack position monster and return it to the hand. When a spell or trap card or another monster's effect is activated, quick effect, you can shuffle one face-up Pendulum monster from your extra deck into the deck, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. You can only use each effect of Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon once per turn. This is completely expected to be straight up the best Odd Eyes monster because the negation it offers is simply amazing. Very reminiscent of not Dragon Rulers, what I was meant to say. Draco Slayers, that's right, I keep mixing those two. The name is a bit too similar. But yeah, this is basically considered to be the fusion variant of Cyber Dragon Infinity, and for all intents and purposes that might as well be. Upon being special summoned also from the graveyard or by any other means, it can shuffle a face-up attack position monster on the field back into the deck, which is a very very strong effect, but mind you, it still does target, so watch out for what you're getting rid of. And not to mention its second effect is a very powerful Omni-Negation effect, which is, yeah, locked into a hard once per turn, but still so deliciously good. Absolutely worth running. Next up we have Rune-Eyes Pendulum Dragon. This one requires specifically Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon and a Spellcaster type monster. Has 3000 attack and 2000 defense, and it's our first level 8 monster. If this card was fusion summoned using a Pendulum summoned monster on the field as fusion material, it is unaffected by your opponent's card effects this turn. Apply the appropriate effect depending on the original level of a monster used as a fusion material that was not Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon. Level 4 or lower. This card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. Or level 5 or higher, this card can make up to 3 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. Yeah, it's another one of those monsters which basically requires an entire deck being built around him. Mind you, the best thing about this card is basically the immunity effect, since for one turn he's unaffected by absolutely everything from your opponent, which basically is very good, as long as you use the Pendulum summoned monster in order to summon him. That can be Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon, and as for Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon, it is searchable by Fusion Conscription due to the existence of this thing, so yeah. But overall, you generally tend to search out Odd Eyes with other better archetypal support, since this fusion is very vaguely worth running, since the triple attacking is only applicable on monsters and not direct attacking as well, so yeah. Next up we have Beast Eyes Pendulum Dragon. It's another level 8. This one requires a dark dragon type monster and a beast monster as material, so it's a bit more generic. And must be either fusion summoned or special summoned by tributing the above cards you control, in which case you do not use polymerization and cannot be special summoned by other ways. And if this card destroys a monster by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the original attack of the beast type fusion material used for this card's summon. And yes, this is basically an OTK enabler whose OTK I actually displayed here on the channel. Basically, this OTK is also no longer well, it is still possible. However, you'd have to rework the deck I used in that OTK due to the fact that White Dragon Wyverburster and Dark Dragon Collapse Serpent are banned. No, not banned, limited to 1, sorry. But anyway, the deck revolved around using Dark Dragon Collapse Serpent as fusion material, along with Master of Oz, which is the highest, which is the beast type monster with the highest amount of attack, that being 4200, in order to fusion summon this, and whenever it destroys a monster by battle, the opponent takes 4200 damage to the face. So yeah. Again, a lot of these eyes, Pendulum Dragons, which are not Odd Eyes, are usually the type you usually build your entire deck around and hoping it basically functions correctly. And the last in the Eyes lineup is Brave Eyes Pendulum Dragon, and it requires a Pendulum Dragon monster and a Warrior type monster as material. And when this card is fusion summoned, you can change the attack of all face-up monsters your opponent controls to 0. Also, for the rest of this turn, other monsters you control cannot attack, and negate the activated effects of monsters with 0 attack. At the end of the damage step, when this card attacks an opponent's monster, but the opponent's monster was not destroyed by that battle, you can banish that opponent's monster. This is not an Odd Eyes card. This is a Reptilian card through and through. yeah, if you have somehow managed to find a consistent way of bringing this out in a Reptilian deck, yeah, it can certainly be a very nice fusion tech choice. As for its actual effect, well, it's actually non-targeting attack reduction effect, which is by all means permanent, and can actually get rid of some pretty indestructible stuff. But it really doesn't feel like an odd-eyes support card, but rather than a generic lizard-looking dragon. So, yeah. Theoretically, it's actually the best of the bunch, in my opinion, due to the fact that it requires a warrior monster, so that means Elemental Hero Prisma is a lot more splashable and can search out Odd Eyes by dumping him into the graveyard if you happen to be running Rune Eyes, for example. Yeah, alright, basically. Brave Eyes and Beast Eyes are the best ones. Rune Eyes is a bit of a one-trick pony, so yeah. Next up we have the first and of the two only Performapal extra deck monster, so that being first off Performapal Gatling Ghoul. This one requires a Performapal monster and a level 5 or higher dark monster as material. Has 2900 attack and 900 defense. And if this card is fusion summoned, you can inflict 200 damage to your opponent for each card on the field. Then if this card was fusion summoned using a Pendulum monster as material, destroy one monster your opponent controls, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack, and you can only use this effect of Performapal Gatling Ghoul once per turn. The fun fact about the destruction effect is that it's actually non-targeting destruction, which is very beautiful in my opinion. Also, the burn damage is actually pretty relevant since you're pretty much guaranteed to get at least 1500 or more burn damage on board, even with the most minimalistic of setup if you're going second. So yeah, Gatling Ghoul is a pretty fun card to pull off, and it can get rid of some of your problem monsters, and yeah, it's an alright card, I guess. And the last Performapal monster in the fusion department, well, in the last Performapal ever, is Performapal Odd Eyes Metal Claw. It's another level 8, and this one requires an Odd Eyes monster and a Performapal monster as material, and cannot be used as fusion material. And if this card is fusion summoned using polymerization, it is unaffected by other card effects. And if this card declares an attack, all monsters you control gain 300 attack until the end of the battle phase. Honestly, it's a crying shame where this never came to the TCG. Yeah, this is an OCG exclusive, by the way, from 2017. And can you guess why? Obviously, it's because of the absolutely outstanding 300 attack into the face when basically attacking with this, which affects all monsters, not just Performapals, Magicians, and Odd Eyes monsters, all of them. Jokey jokes aside, if you have summoned this with polymerization, you basically get a beat stick which is immune to absolutely everything and can basically get over almost absolutely everything. So yeah, and yeah, those TCG players are certainly praying to God that this thing gets printed in the TCGs at some point or another. And now we move on to the good bits. First of which we have the second Supreme King Dragon, that being Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom. And yeah, it's our last non-pendulum monster in the fusion department. Requires 2 dark pendulum monsters as material, has the exact same stats as the original Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, and must be either fusion summoned or special summoned by tributing the above cards you control, in which case you do not use polymerization. Once per turn, you can target one other monster on the field or in the graveyard. Until the end phase, this card's name becomes that monster's original name, and replace this effect with that monster's original effects. Also, for the rest of this turn, if your monster attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing the battle damage to your opponent. Yeah, this one's banned for, well, a very good reason. Being able to copy absolutely any effect from the graveyard and the field is absolutely magnificently strong to have. And not to mention, it gives all your monsters piercing damage, as that wasn't fun already. Yeah, sure, you're most likely not going to be running into a lot of defense position chicklets when playing in the Link era, but come on, the option is so good if you can actually take it. And not to mention that this thing, along with Tyrant Neptune, which is also banned for the same reason as this card, used to copy the effect of Literal Assemble the Nightingale, no, Independent Nightingale, sorry, I keep mixing those two up, in order to basically result in a good 5,000 to 8,000 plus effect damage per turn. So yeah, no wonder he got hit. Absolutely max out on him if he ever comes off the limited list, or run any number you can. And yeah, let's hope that the servants are all gathered up in order to serve their supreme king one day. Anyway, yeah, this is a fantastic card. Alright, let's move on to the Pendulum Fusion monsters, first of which is Odd Eyes Venom Dragon. This is a Pendulum Fusion that's level 10, scale 1. And its pendulum effect is that once per turn you can target a 1 fusion monster you control, and it gains 1000 attack for each monster your opponent controls until the end of this turn. And its monster effect is it has the exact same stats as Shooting Star Dragon. Yeah, that's what I'm calling these stats. And it requires a Starving Venom monster and an Odd Eyes monster, and must be fusion summoned, and then can be pendulum summoned. Once per turn, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls. Until the end phase, this card gains attack equal to its attack, and if it does, this card's name becomes that monster's original name, and replace this effect with that monster's original effects. And if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can special summon 1 monster from your pendulum zone, and if you do, place this card in your pendulum zone. Yeah, this is one of the 3 so-called pair combination dragons, which I also described in my in one of my top 10 lists, which are the top 10 best pendulum extra deck monsters. And yeah, this was on a pretty respectable high spot because, well, it's a very nice card indeed. Its pendulum effect gives one of the biggest battle boosts I've ever seen in history, although it's limited to only fusion monsters. However, you can target any fusion monster, which is a huge plus. And then the second effect basically is Starving Venom, which doesn't even have level restrictions in terms of what it can target, since Starving Venom nowadays can't target Link monsters. And not to mention that it also gains all the attack points of said monster, and also if you happen to get rid of it, you can special summon any monster from your pendulum zone in order to place this in the pendulum zone. But frankly, if you can actually pendulum summon this, you're rarely going to be using it, since you're always going to be pendulum summoning this if your opponent happens to continuously get rid of it. So yeah, great card. And for the final fusion monster, everyone, please hail and bow to the ever so supreme King Zark. This is a massive level 12 with 4000 attack and defense, scale 1. And its pendulum effect is that fusion, synchro, and xyz monsters your opponent controls cannot activate their effects. Once per turn, when your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, except during the draw phase or the damage step, you can destroy that card. And its monster effect, it requires 4 dragon monsters, of set which is 1 fusion, 1 synchro, 1 xyz, and 1 pendulum. And must be fusion summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways. If this card is special summoned, destroy all cards your opponent controls. Cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. When this card destroys an opponent's monster of a battle, you can special summon 1 Supreme King Dragon monster from your deck or extra deck, and if this card in the monster zone is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. The funny thing is that it actually mentions this thing being destroyed by a card effect, since, well, it's kind of redundant, since this thing cannot be destroyed or targeted by card effects. But I guess it works in the scenario when you actually use skill drain, and then then its effects become negated. Then, well, it's a big bad boss monster of the big bad archetype, and basically the most relevant and consistent way to play this deck nowadays. It's 4000 attack beats that destroys absolutely everything when it's summoned, which is pretty easy to do. And not to mention, some people can actually stall in terms of, like, get the opponent to pretty average like life points, such as 6000 or 4000, and then summon this destroy everything, go in for the game, and if some of them are turboing him turn 2 or turn 3, they can activate a certain trap card in order to pump the opponent even harder and OTK him even harder. Supreme King Zark is still the absolute best fusion monster and the absolutely best Pendulum extra deck monster ever that existed, and building a deck is always worth your while in Yu-Gi-Oh! And yeah, absolutely worth running and building a deck around. So yeah, go wild. Next up we have the Synchro lineup, first of which we have the only level 7 Odd Eyes Meteor Burst Dragon. It's completely generic, has the exact same stats as the original, and when this card is special summoned, you can target a card in your Pendulum zone and special summon it. Also, it cannot attack for the rest of its turn, and you can only use its effect once per turn, and the second effect is basically an Armada's shutdown only for monsters. It's fine. This thing saw tons of play in basically every Synchro Mash decks that was pretty rampant before the Link era, before he got outclassed by basically anything that can afford the an Armada's shutdown, which was pretty easier to summon in said Link era. Yeah, in a Pendulum focus deck you can also extend your plays by summoning a Pendulum monster from your Pendulum zone, which is also a nice touch in my opinion. So yeah, it's an okay card. Next up we have the first level 8 and the last Synchro monster that's not a Pendulum monster. That being Supreme King Dragon Clearwing. It's a level 8 as opposed to its original monster, which was a level 7. This was done due to the fact that Zark in the anime used 2 Dark Worms in order to summon him, which were 2 level 4s. So yeah, it would be kind of awkward to manage it if it was actually a level 7. Anyway, it's completely generic, except, well, it's not completely generic. It requires a tuner and a non-tuner dark Pendulum monsters as material. And if this card is Synchro summoned, you can destroy all face-up monsters your opponent controls. And once per turn before damage calculation, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can destroy that monster, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the destroyed monster's original attack. And if this card is in your graveyard, you can tribute 2 Supreme King Dragon monsters and special summon it. It's a very cool Synchro monster to consider having. Basically, it's a prototype version of Cyber's Quantum Dragon, and for all the right reasons. Upon it being Synchro summon, you basically get a Lightning Vortex with no cost, and not to mention whatever it battles is guaranteed to die unless it has some protection effects ready to go, and then you can basically inflict a pretty hefty amount of burn damage on top of that, even though it burns the opponent for the monster's original attack, not its current attack. The revival effect is barely pulled off because, well, it is nice to have it, but you're rarely going to be having this thing in your graveyard ready for that revival effect, so yeah. And the last Synchro monster is Odd Eyes Wing Dragon. This one is also a level 8, and this one is a scale 10 Pendulum monster. And its Pendulum effect is that once per turn when a monster you control battles an opponent's monster before damage calculation, you can make that monster you control gain attack equal to the current attack of the opponent's monster, if it is battling until the end of the damage step. And its monster effect requires a Dark Tuner and a non-tuner Clearwing monster. And if this card is in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place this card in your Pendulum zone. And you can only use each of the following effects of Odd Eyes Wing Dragon once per turn. You can either target an effect monster your opponent controls, it has its effects negated until the end of this turn, or during either player's battle phase. If this card was Synchro summoned, you can destroy all level 5 or higher monsters your opponent controls. Yeah, essentially what this thing is a slightly worse Crystal Wing, and that's about it. But still, it has a very nice appealing visual design to it, and its Pendulum effect is actually pretty sweet to pull off. And it also has a Gargantuan scale 10 if it happens to be end up in your Pendulum zone. So yeah, it's fine to run it if you really feel like it. It couldn't do you much harm. It's still a very nice card, and I most of all pray that it hits the TCG, because this is the only one of the 3 combo dragons that is still not in the TCG for whatever reason. Konami, please get it together. Watch this video and please import this guy in the Eternity Code already. Next up we have the Xyz lineup. First of which we have Time Star Magician. Yeah, Magician monster. And this is rank 4, which requires 2 level 4 Magician Pendulum monsters as material. And must first be Xyz summoned with the above Xyz materials, and once per turn you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, add to your hand 1 Dark Spellcaster type monster from your deck, graveyard and or face-up extra deck, and once per turn if a Pendulum monster card in your monster zone or Pendulum zone will be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can send a Spellcaster type monster from your deck to the graveyard instead. Honestly, for the Pendulum Magician archetype, this actually has a pretty good effect. It can search out your Pendulum Magicians from anywhere, and not to mention you can protect them by sending materials from by sending stuff from the deck to the graveyard, which I believe is not even limited to a once per turn. So yeah, you get protection and also graveyard setup on top of that. You basically run 3 of these in dedicated Magician builds, but in Odd Eyes Zarg builds, not dark builds. You basically run, well, 1 max, since there are so much other better options you might need in order to bring out the big boy Zark sooner. So yeah. And next up we have the last Supreme King Dragon, that being Supreme King Dragon Dark Rebellion. This one requires 2 level 4 Dark Pendulum monsters as material, has the exact same stats as the original Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon. And once per turn, before damage calculation, if this card attack battles an opponent's monster, you can detach 1 material from this card until the end of this turn, change the attack of that face-up opponent's monster to 0, and if you do, this card gains attack equal to the original attack of that opponent's monster. During the battle phase, quick effect, you can return this card to the extra deck and then special summon up to 2 face-up Supreme King Dragon and or Supreme King Gate Pendulum monsters from your extra deck in defense position. Yeah, this is the only other Supreme King Dragon which kept its tag-out effect, and of all things considered, just like Odd Eyes, it's a pretty good tag-out effect since you can basically replace 1 material for basically, well, 2 in order for link place and all that. You can use it when this thing runs out of Xyz materials in order to Xyz summon it again in order to get its materials back. It basically has self-recursion in that sort of way. And not to mention it has the best kind of honest effect, basically drains the opponent's monster from attack and then transfers the attack to itself. Basically a straight upgrade over the original Dark Rebellion. So yeah, great card indeed. Next up we have the rank 7 Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon. This one requires 2 level 7 monsters, it's completely generic, and when any player's monster declares an attack, you can detach 1 material from this card instead. Then to negate the attack, then you can special summon 1 Odd Eyes monster from your hand or graveyard. If this Xyz summon card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Odd Eyes monster from your extra deck, except Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon. You can only use each effect of Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon once per turn. I frankly don't see many builds running this, mainly due to the fact that that it specifically needs to be, well, destroyed and send. It specifically it doesn't have to be destroyed. Well, you can actually use it as a link material in order to get a free monster, but again, it needs a bit of setup since while the new Master Rule 4 is in place. So yeah, it can also basically help you out with swarming, and in terms of protection, you can also basically if you used Odd Eyes monsters as material, you detach 1 as material, and then you bring back said Odd Eyes monster when you basically stop an attack. Again, run by preference since making use of its floating effect, which is actually very easy to pull off just simply using it as a link material. You can basically you have to make additional setup in order for it to work. So yeah. Next up, yeah, we're done with the regular Xyz monsters. We have the last 2 Xyz Pendulum monsters. First of which is Odd Eyes Rebellion Dragon, which is our last combo dragon. This is a scale 4, and it's another rank 7, and its pendulum effect is that once per turn, if you have no cards in your other pendulum zone, you can place one pendulum monster from your deck in your pendulum zone. And its monster effect is that it requires 2 level 7 dragon type monsters, and if you can pendulum summon level 7, you can pendulum summon this card. And if this card is Xyz summoned using an Xyz monster's material, destroy as many level 7 or lower monsters your opponent controls as possible, and then inflict 1000 damage to your opponent for each card destroyed. And if you do this card can make 3 attacks during each battle phase this turn. If this card in the monster zone is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can destroy as many cards in your pendulum zone as possible, minimum 1. And if you do, place this card in your pendulum zone. The pendulum effect straight up lets you place any pendulum monster in your other pendulum zone, which is a beyond good effect in any pendulum focused deck. And its second effect was actually pretty kick-ass when this card came out, but it isn't really the most optimal thing since link monsters are a thing which don't have levels, so the effect basically won't go off and you won't be able to attack 3 times with this thing. Still, you can run it if you really want to. It's certainly not a bad card, far from it. But it's, as a rank 7 Xyz Pendulum, it's entirely outclassed by their final monster, that being Odd-Eye's Raging Dragon. This is a Pendulum rank 7, scale 1, has the exact same pendulum effect as the Odd-Eye's Rebellion Dragon and the exact same summoning condition, and his effect is the following, the monster effect. If you can pendulum summon level 7, you can pendulum summon this card from your extra deck, and if this card in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place it in your pendulum zone, and if this card is Xyz summoned using as an Xyz monster's material, it gains these effects. It can make a second attack during each battle phase, and once per turn, you can detach one material from it, destroy as many cards your opponent controls as possible, and if you do, this card gains 200 attack for each until the end of this turn. So not only can this card gain more attack and attack twice during each battle phase, it's also a once per turn, well, short circuit for the archetype. It just blows up everything and then OTKs the hell out of you. There's a reason why this is such a frequently ran card, and this is possibly one of the reasons why Phantom Launch is actually banned, since people used to then summon Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon, rank it up with the Phantom Launch, summon Requiem Xyz Dragon, and then use rank up Magic Astral Force in order to rank Requiem up into this. So yeah, it was actually a pretty fun way to summon it. You'd usually involve the Xiangsheng Magician doing their thing along with a level 7 monster and an Xyz monster. So yeah, this is an absolutely fantastic card, and as you all know, it's part of the greatest scene Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever seen. Watch my top 10 list for more details, but yeah, this is the embodiment of awesomeness. Next up we have, well, their back row, first of which is Amazing Pendulum, their first spell card. If you have no cards in your pendulum zones, add 2 face-up Magician Pendulum monsters with different names from your extra deck to your hand. You can only activate 1 Amazing Pendulum per turn. It's basically a recovery version of a certain other card known as Pendulum Call, which for the price of discarding a card from your hand allows you to add 2 Magician cards from your deck to your hand, and not to mention once you activate it, they're safe from destruction for 1 turn. So yeah, this is basically a worse version of that spell, and yeah, if you run it, it's not more than 1. Next up we have Magical Star Illusion. If your opponent controls a monster and you control as many or fewer monsters, monsters currently on the field gain attack equal to the combined levels of all monsters their control or currently controls times 100 until the end of this turn. If you're going first and you summon and you manage to summon like Pancratops or something, you can boost its attacks severely, but it ain't going to matter in the long run, because, well, this is one of the most pointless battle boosts in history. and you're most probably going to be summoning a whole lot of link monsters, so which you don't even have levels, so no, not worth it. Next up we have Performance Hurricane. Target cards your opponent controls up to the number of Performapal monsters you control, return them to the hand. You can only activate one of these per turn. If you manage to swarm your field with Performapals before going into massive link spamming, this can actually result in some solid field clearing, but watch out for targeting, and it specifically says Performapals, not Performapal Odd Eyes or Magicians, so yeah, it's a bit more specific, so run by preference in your ratios. Next up we have Illusion Balloons. If a monster was destroyed this turn while you controlled it, excavate the top 5 cards of your deck, then you can special summon one excavated Performapal monster, also shuffle the rest back into your deck. It's basically a worse, it basically gives an opponent's, your monster the Mystic Tomato effect, relying on luck sack to win, which rarely happens in Performapals, so yeah, it's a quick play, which is alright. It's basically most of the time, if you are building a dedicated Performapal build, you're going to excavate some okay stuff, but most of the time you'll end up with a dead Performapal Kuribo, and that's it. And yeah, again, run by preference. Next up we have Hippo Carnival. This is a quick play that says to special summon 3 Hippo tokens, Beast type Earth level 1, attack 0, defense 0, but they cannot be tributed at all, and you cannot special summon monsters, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck while a Hippo token is in a monster zone. For the rest of this turn, after this card resolves, your opponent monsters your opponent controls. What the hell is up with me? Your opponent controls cannot target monsters for attacks except Hippo tokens. Yeah, just run and Scapegoat. It summons 1 token more, and it also doesn't lock you from extra deck summoning, which this thing does for some reason, and I won't ever be like, I won't ever understand what the hell were they thinking when they made it like this. But anyway, let's see if Super Hippo Carnival makes up for it. Yeah, you can special summon a Performapal Hippo from your hand, deck, or graveyard. Then you can special summon as many Hippo tokens, Beast type, Earth level 1, attack 0, defense 0 as possible, but they cannot be tributed, and monsters your opponent controls cannot target monsters or attacks except attacks for the rest of this turn, except Hippo tokens, and you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck while a Hippo token is in the monster zone. So, for the price of running a very crappy Performapal main deck monster, you get 1 more token, and you can basically special summon that monster from, well, wherever it is, and it also locks you into the extra deck because it's made in China. So yeah, well, I'm joking about the China part, but you get what I mean. Yeah, just run Scapegoat. It's much well more worth your time, and it's limited for a reason. Next up we have Performapal Recasting. Reveal any number of Performapal monsters from your hand and shuffle them into the deck, then and draw cards equal to the number of cards you shuffled into the deck plus 1, and you can only activate 1 Performapal Recasting per turn. It's basically an archetypal magical mallet, which basically covers itself as cause, which basically results in an even 0, so yeah. In a pure Performapal deck, this is a godsend, because the deck without the Pepe engine tends to break quite a few times, so yeah, it's very good. Next up we have Performapal Pop-Up. Send up to 2 or 3 cards from your hand to the graveyard. Draw the same number of cards you sent to the graveyard. Then if you have 2 cards in your Pendulum zone, so you can special summon Performapal monsters, Magician Pendulum monsters, and or Odd Eyes monsters from your hand with different names that have levels between the exclusive the Pendulum scale of all the cards in your Pendulum zones, up to the number of cards you drew by this effect. If you did not special summon by this effect, you lose 1000 life points for each card in your hand. You can only activate 1 Performapal Pop-Up once per turn. What the hell were they even thinking with this one? So this is a draw card, which basically requires you to go -3 in order to activate it, and basically it relies on a luck sack in order for you to at least not take any damage. So yeah, if this doesn't scream don't run it, I don't know what else does. So yeah, don't run it. Next up we have the field spell, the first out of 3. Performapal Dramatic Theater is a field spell which allows all monsters you control to gain 200 life attack for each monster you control with a different type. Once per turn, if you can control 4 Performapal monsters with different types, you can special summon one odd-eyes monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard. Oh boy, a completely irrelevant attack boost at the cost of controlling a lot of Performapals, which are most likely going to be used as link material before you even think about activating this. And not to mention that if you happen to control 4 of them, you basically get an odd eyes from everywhere. And yeah, odd eyes have much more better consistency and searching options, so don't even bother with this one. A way better field spell, and the best among them, is Sky Iris. Your opponent cannot target Magician, Performapal, or Odd Eyes cards in your Pendulum zones with card effects. You can target one other face-up card you control, destroy it, and if you do, add one Odd Eyes card from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Sky Iris once per turn. It's as simple as that. You basically run 3 of these at the cost of destroying one of your own cards. You tend to you get to search a blue odd eyes. My God, I'm getting very infected by the fact that the blue eyes support is getting worse and worse as time goes on. But anyway, yeah, you get to search an odd eyes monster, and it basically triggers the effects of Astrograph and Chronograph, which tends to give you another search if you are playing casually and you're running Astrograph because you are such an overpowered Lord of Yu-Gi-Oh! So yeah, Sky Iris is the best out of the 3 field spells, even though we haven't still looked at the third. But we might as well don't have to, because the final field spell is Smile Action. When this card is activated, each player can banish up to 5 spells from their graveyard face down. When a monster declares an attack, activate this card and the attacked player can apply this effect. Randomly add one of your banished cards by this effect to your hand, then you can discard it. And if you do, negate the attack, and if you did not discard it, any battle damage you take this turn is doubled. Holy shit, what the hell is this? Okay, so for those of you who didn't watch Arc 5, there are these special types of cards called action cards, which basically require players to like actively run across the field and perform all kinds of hurdles and hips and hoops in order to find a card in the environment and then apply its effect. It's usually something that halves all battle damage, or saves you from attacks, or basically cancels out another action card. And what this field spell does, it basically replicates the use of action cards, which I thought that I was never ever going to see in my life. I know that they've printed a lot of these skill cards, which are now a thing from Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns, but that actually feels like it's something that could actually, that might have actually been the plan since the very start of Yu-Gi-Oh! It sounds like fun, but this, like, why? Why is this even a thing? And not to mention, if you choose not to discard the card, if you happen to add something very good, such as, I don't know, Ancient Telescope, joking of course, you all the damage you take for that turn is doubled. All damage, not just the attack you were just about to receive. All damage that might come after that. So yeah, don't run this even if your goddamn life depended on it. And no, you can't even add cards which are banished due to the effect of Pot of Desires. So no. Next up we have Smile World, the poster boy of the Smile support, and it allows all face-up monsters currently on the field to gain 100 attack for each monster currently on the field until the end of this turn. Does this sound pointless to you? Yep, it sure does. It's basically a card which the entirety of Yuya's motives and character struggles and, well, everything ever Yuya related is based on. And yeah, you're most likely going to be using this if you performed an extra link or something and have an established board of monsters, and your opponent doesn't control anything to OTK him even harder. So yeah, basically summon Zark and use Smile World in order to perfect your board. Well, I know it's some very bizarre irony there, but I know it works. And the final Smile card in the Spell and Trap lineup, that is, we still have a Trap card and with Smile in its name, is Smile Universe, a quick play spell. Special summon as many face-up Pendulum monsters from your extra deck as possible, but they have their effects negated, if any. Then your opponent gains life points equal to the total attack of those special summon monsters. You cannot normal or special summon other monsters or attack during the turn you activate this card. So yeah, all the restrictions are basically here in order to circumvent some massive extra deck shenanigans that this card might have originally enabled. Because, well, you can basically fill your board entirely with Pendulum monsters, and then you get to use them as link material. And not to mention, you can, if you can actually chain multiple copies of this thing. Yeah, this thing does not have a once per turn limitation. However, it does restrict you from normal or special summoning, so I guess that is to be expected. And it also prevents you from attacking. So yeah, the best thing you're going to be using it for is, well, protecting yourself and giving your opponent a whole lot of life points. And not to mention, God bless you if you play this against an Arrow Mage player. So yeah. Alright, next up we have the continuous spell Magician's Right Hand, which were mentioned when I talked about the Performapal Sky Magician. Anyway, negate the effect of your opponent's first spell card or effect that resolves each turn while you control a spellcaster monster, and if you do, or if it did not have an effect, destroy this card. And yeah, in order to understand this, we better take a look at the Magician's Left Hand, which is actually a bit more played than the right hand, and has the exact same shit, only for trap cards. So basically, the Sky Magician relies on switching between these two constantly in order to completely shut down the opponent's back row, meaning spell and traps are basically useless. And unlike stuff like some other stuff which can negate back row, this card can also work against cards that activate in the graveyard, and including hand traps as well. So yeah, it's definitely versatile in that department. So yeah, absolutely worth running. And it basically, these are actually staples in basically any spellcaster type deck that has space for them. So yeah. Next up we have Magician's Restage, another continuous spell, not trap. You can target one level 3 or lower spellcaster monster in your graveyard, special summon it. This effect can only be used once while this card is face up on the field, and if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add one Magician continuous spell card from your deck to your hand except Magician's Restage. It's basically a once in a lifetime opportunity monster reborn, and upon being sent to the graveyard by stuff like, I don't know, Scrap Dragon or anything that can abuse you, sending your stuff to the graveyard, you get to add a Magician continuous spell card, which we've just mentioned earlier, except this thing to your hand. So yeah, basically 99% of spellcaster type decks usually run this, so it's a nice card. Next up we have Odd-Eyes Fusion, the archetypal fusion spell for Odd-Eyes monsters, of course. Fusion summon one Dragon Fusion monsters from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field as fusion materials, and if your opponent controls 2 or more monsters and you control no monsters, you can also use up to 2 Odd-Eyes monsters in your extra deck as fusion materials. You can only activate one Odd-Eyes Fusion per turn. So yeah, this is actually one of the best fusion cards ever made, due to the fact that its alternative activation conditions upon you controlling no monsters and your opponent has 2 or more monsters. You get to use Odd-Eyes monsters from your extra deck, but don't be fooled, it doesn't refer to only Pendulum monsters that are currently face up in the extra deck. You can legit use Odd-Eyes monsters which are still face down and not summoned at all from the extra deck, Mega Zaborg style. And you can basically use this in order to generate the materials for Zark as well faster, and you can basically dump Pendulum extra deck monsters, since those can be counted as either, well, the summoning mechanic you're using style and Pendulum style monsters. So yeah, in pure Odd Eyes builds, and well, in dedicated competitive Odd Eyes builds, this is an absolute 3-off staple, and it is also searchable by Scorpio and Darling Cobra. So yeah, good card. Next up, we have Spiral Flame Strike. Activate one of these effects. If you control an Odd Eyes card, target one card on the field and destroy it, and add to your hand one level 7 Odd Eyes monster from your deck, or one face-up level 7 Odd Eyes Pendulum monster from your extra deck. It's basically an archetypal Rhoda for Odd Eyes, or an archetypal, well, Raigeki Break for Odd Eyes. All of these are pretty fine effects, and usually you run 3 of these at all times. And the final card we have today, in the spell card, the final spell card, is Star Pendulum Graph. Your opponent cannot target spellcaster type monsters you control with spell cards or effects. If a face-up Magician Pendulum card leaves on your monster zone or Pendulum zone, add one Magician Pendulum monster from your deck to your hand, and you can only use this effect of Star Pendulum Graph once per turn. Now moving on to the trap support a bit, we have Time Pendulum Graph, which allows you to gives protection to spellcaster type monsters for trap cards, and you can only use the following effects of Time Pendulum Graph once per turn. You can target one Magician Pendulum card in your monster zone or Pendulum zone, and one card in your opponent controls. Destroy them. Then if this card did not destroy 2 cards, you can send one card from your on the field to the graveyard. So yeah, this is a pretty fantastic duo of cards. Star Pendulum Graph basically makes up for the stuff that Time Pendulum Graph happens to pop by giving a search for basically giving a search for a Magician Pendulum monster, and Time Pendulum Graph happens to be, well, archetypal kind of double cyclone, which if it doesn't happen to destroy anything, which you tend to use like destroy something and then target something that cannot be destroyed by card effects. And then you get to send it to the graveyard anyway, because the second part of the effect is non-targeting removal and, well, non-destruction removal as well. So yeah, pretty strong array of effects for a trap card. It's also searchable by Double Iris Magician, which happens to be banned at the moment, like I already said. So yeah, these 2 cards and their power are primarily one of the reasons why Double Iris Magician is now banned. Alright, next on our next trap card is Supreme Rage. This is the final Supreme King Zark support card, and let's see how it goes. If you control Supreme King Zark, destroy as many monsters you control as possible except Supreme King Zark. Well, it's funny still. And if you do special summon up to 4 Supreme King Dragon monsters with different names from your hand, deck, extra deck, and or graveyard, ignoring their summoning conditions. You can banish this card from your graveyard and target one Supreme King Dragon Xyz monster you control, that attach 2 Supreme King Dragon monsters to it as materials and from your graveyard, and or face up from your extra deck. So yeah, this is basically a very explosive anime card that actually got improved when it came from the anime. And if you have the right setup, you can basically have Zark on the field with all of its Supreme Servants. Well, good luck with that, since Supreme King Servant Starving Venom is banned. But yeah, the 3 other ones are still very much worth your time, and basically, when you activate this, it's basically a game ender, and yeah, the opponent might as well scoop, since you are going to basically destroy the hell out of him. And yeah, in the Zark decks, this is a 2 or 3 off staple. Next up, we have Performapal Call. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, target that attacking monster, negate the attack, and if you do, add up to 2 Performapal monsters from your deck to your hand whose total defense is less than or equal to the attack of the targeted monster until the end of the next turn after this card resolves. You cannot special monsters from the extra deck. Oh boy, why did you do that? Why did you have to lock me out of the extra deck? It's really not good, and it's really not fun. It's bad. It's okay if you happen to it does give a pretty solid search effect, but But the fact that it limits you from summoning monsters from the extra deck is a very nerve-breaking experience. So yeah, it's in other words, it's not worth running. Next up, we have the continuous trap Performapal Pinch Helper. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can negate the attack, and if you do, special summon one Performapal monster from your deck, but it has its effects are negated. And when an attack is declared involving a monster you control and an opponent's monster, you can send this card to the graveyard and you take no battle damage from that battle. If you bricked very hard and you drew into this, you basically set this, well, provided that the opponent doesn't get rid of it by other means, and then you can basically negate the attack and get a free monster out of it. But in slower formats this was fairly more consistent and easier to pull off, but in competitive formats it's really not worth talking about. Moving on. Next up we have Performapal Revival. If a monster you control is destroyed by battle or by a card effect, you can special summon a Performapal monster from your hand or graveyard. It's basically a Call of the Haunted for the Archetype, which requires a monster to be destroyed by battle or card effect, which is fine, but nothing to write home about. So yeah, you might as well just be running Monster Reborn instead of this. Next up, we have Performapal Showdown. Target any number of face-up monsters your opponent currently controls up to the number of face-up spell cards you control. Change those monsters to face-down defense position. I think I don't need to elaborate further, so yeah, it's bad. Don't run it. Moving on. Next up we have Command Performance. If you control Performapal monsters, change all face-up attack position monsters your opponent controls to defense position, and monsters changed to defense position by this effect cannot change their battle positions until the end of this turn. Defense position this, defense position that. Again, when are you going to drop the freaking defense position? We're in the Link era. Stop it. It's no longer a viable strategy unless you're, well, I don't know. Moving on. Next up we have the final Smile card, that being Smile Potion. If you control no monsters and your opponent controls a monster whose current attack is higher than its original, draw 2 cards. You can only activate 1 Smile Potion per turn. So that's what Smile World is supposed to do. Consistency. And also this is a trap card for some imbecilic reason. So no, it's not worth running. Oh boy, finally we've made it to the final card, and that is the trap card, Last Minute Cancel. When an opponent's monster declares an attack while you control an attack position monster, change all monsters you control to defense position, and for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, return any face-up Performapal monster you control that is destroyed by battle or card effect to the hand instead of sending it to the graveyard. Again, could be a useful effect, especially the second part, but why the absolute hell does it have to switch your monsters to defense position? You're most likely going to have a full board of Link monsters, so it doesn't matter, and it basically makes the card borderline useless. Don't run it. Oh boy, finally we've made it to the grading scale. The consistency has drastically become worse since the banning of key components of the Pepe playstyle, so Performapals usually don't have many consistency options. Magicians are actually the most consistent out of the bunch. Odd Eyes tag along pretty consistently, especially in builds focused on Zark. So yeah, which usually runs more than one and basically a whole lot of magicians. So I'm inclined to give the consistency a generous 2 out of 3 in that regard. Power gets 2 out of 3 because the only mainly decent output, the power output that the deck can produce is again index focused around Zark, and Pepe is no longer playable with the key components being either banned or limited. So yeah, comeback ability gets a 1 out of 3 because Pendulum Magicians were never kind of very strong in that regard. I mean, during the Pendulum era they were kind of very exceedingly strong in that port, since they can basically offer very various recovery kinds of effects, and certain top decks can certainly kick them back into the game. And not to mention that in today's meta, barely any Pendulum decks even exist, and barely anyone even runs Pendulum monsters. And not to mention, Wavering Eyes is banned, which was one of the best things to come out of the Pendulum era. So yeah, it's completely understandable. 1 out of 3. Protection, well, it exists only in very specific intervals in Zarg builds and Pendulum Magician builds, while Performapals can fight for shit, so that's a 1 out of 3 in my book. And as for the versatility, well, Pendulum Magicians are basically, well, some Pendulum Magicians are splashable in some other various spellcaster type decks. Magician's Hands are also kind of very splashable. Zarg decks are very, very versatile in terms of how they're supposed to function in terms of, well, general playability. Zark is usually super easy to bring out, even on turn 1. So yeah, in terms of versatility, I don't have that many problems, but still it's not the most perfect thing to consider, so I'll be giving them a 2 out of 3 as well. It was better than I expected. I expected the archetype to be a lot worse, since it has this much cards and, well, all with various gimmicky playstyles. But anyway, I'm about to be cut off in 3 minutes again. I finally managed to finish this video. I took a lot of breaks. I took some days off without even recording, because going through 169 cards is certainly not an easy experience. Only one archetype analysis left that is that I am considering on doing on my channel, until, like, well, Yu-Gi-Oh! 7 comes along, or any of the past Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetypes gets adapted as a real archetype. And those are the GX era archetype heroes. Yeah, the absolute largest archetype in existence, capping at 247 cards, I believe. So after I get back from my exams, I'll think about if I'll actually be doing that archetype analysis, and if I will be doing it, the format is going to be slightly different. I'm not going to be reading out the effects. I'm just going to be quickly going over cards and basically what their best aspects are, and what ratios you run them in, and what builds are they most formidable in, what the best heroes are, because there are different kinds of heroes there. We have elemental heroes, destiny heroes, masked heroes, vision heroes, then the contrast heroes, and extra heroes, and evil heroes. 7 types of heroes, really. That's a hell of a lot. And not to mention they're getting some new support in some recent support waves. I won't be double checking like I did with Performapals if they actually got some new support, because you'll just have to wait for the anime rematch if I ever get to that series in order to see that support. Anyway, I'm about to be cut off soon. Thank you all so much for sitting through this very, very long video. I believe it's going to be well over 2 hours when I upload it onto YouTube. If you actually sat through this entire video, I really applaud you, and I really thank you for sticking with me through this. It's been a real hassle to make these days because of the bitchy college and everything, and every single problem that comes crashing down with said college. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. See you all. Have a good day, and peace.